This video is crafted to aid you in unwinding or drifting off to sleep. Before we begin, if you anticipate falling asleep, please introduce yourself in the comments section. Additionally, if you haven't done so yet, kindly like the video and subscribe to the channel. As always, I would love to hear from you about where you are tuning in from, so let us know in the comments and share the time at your location. Thank you once again for joining me. Make yourself comfortable, grab a glass of water, ensure your door is locked, and turn off the lights. Don't forget to say hello in the comments. It's time to close your eyes. This incident took place earlier last year, and it still unsettles me if I dwell on it too much. First, a little background for context. I work as a delivery driver for Uber Eats, doing it as a side gig for the past year to earn some additional income. Oh, and I'm female. Anyway, Uber Eats is a pretty laid-back job, although the pay is far from ideal, especially during the nighttime. Typically, any orders that come in after 10 p.m. are just last-minute fast food requests from customers, with the likelihood of receiving a tip being even lower than usual. Late-night deliveries seldom yield a decent profit, which is why I rarely take them on. However, on this particular night last year, there was a special bonus offer: complete 15 deliveries within a specific time frame to earn an extra $75. That was music to my ears. In such cases, late-night deliveries are fantastic because there's no traffic, and it doesn't matter where you're picking up from. Bring on the bonuses. The quicker you complete them, the sooner you can head home and crash. I was on a roll, having wrapped up my final McDonald's delivery at 2:30 in the morning. I cashed in my bonus and decided to call it a night. For context, this all unfolded in downtown San Diego. The heart of downtown San Diego is lively, filled with entertaining restaurants and clubs. But as you venture further out, it becomes increasingly dubious. Beyond 16th Street, it turns quite questionable, with numerous homeless encampments and all that entails. I make it a point to steer clear of that area, but to get back home and onto the freeway, I had no choice but to drive through the neighborhood. Another piece of pertinent information. I drive a 2002 Ford Focus, and nothing about it is automatic. To raise or lower the windows, you have to reach over and crank the lever manually. Since it's cumbersome to operate them manually every time, during deliveries, I typically keep both windows rolled down for ease in picking up and dropping off items. On this particular night, my windows were down, as usual. I intended to roll them up before I reached 16th Street, where the homeless camp was located, but I didn't quite make it that far. As I turned onto a side street leading towards the main thoroughfare, I noticed a man in one of those orange, reflective construction vests standing by the roadside. Construction is a constant downtown, and it's not unusual for it to take place at night, so I didn't give it much thought. However, as I approached, the man darted into the middle of the street, waving his arms to signal me to stop. I began to slow down, assuming he was going to manage the traffic or redirect me somehow. I decelerated to 10 miles per hour, then gradually down to 5, keeping a cautious distance as I tried to comprehend what I was meant to do next. Suddenly, he broke into a jog toward my vehicle, coming to a halt directly in front of it, effectively trapping me. A sense of unease immediately washed over me. This was odd. I wished my windows had been rolled up. It was 3 a.m. on a desolate road, and there was not another soul in sight apart from me and this man. People often discuss the fight or flight response, and I had always been curious about how I would react in a situation that demanded such a decision. Now, I knew my instinct was to freeze. As I was slowing down, the realization dawned on me 5 seconds later than it should have. This man was not a construction worker. He wore a hard hat and a vest, but his smile was the most unsettling I had ever encountered. Initially, I assumed he was smiling to be polite, but maintaining a smile for more than a few seconds is deeply disconcerting. Try it yourself. Count to 5 in your head while grinning, and you'll understand what I mean. That was precisely what this man was doing. Now that he was directly in front of me, I could tell he was either homeless or something else entirely. He was an older man, perhaps in his 60s, but homelessness often ages people prematurely, so it was hard to be certain. He stood there, staring at me with wild eyes and a broad, toothy grin. His smile and demeanor reminded me eerily of Twisty from American Horror Story. This man appeared deranged. I should have reversed immediately, but my mind was in a state of panic, and I couldn't think quickly enough. I sat frozen in my car, convinced that this might be how I would meet my end. The entire time, he's completely silent, merely leering, and then, like a stealthy ninja, he suddenly leaps onto the hood of my car, slamming his fist against it. I am paralyzed with fear, just watching this man as he begins pounding on the hood, crawling around on his hands and knees. He doesn't utter a single word, simply crawling and keeping his gaze fixed on me. That was the most terrifying aspect. He never broke eye contact throughout the entire ordeal, and all the while, he maintained a sinister grin. The mere thought of my windows being open made me feel nauseous, yet the idea of looking away to roll them up seemed even more frightening. It felt as if any sudden movement or averted glance would provoke him to try to get inside my car. He remained silent the whole time. I think it might have been less frightening if he had spoken, but instead, he just pounded his fists on the car while staring intently at me. In reality, the entire encounter probably lasted no more than 15 seconds, but it stretched on like an eternity. I was panicking, and before I could gather my wits to do anything remotely sensible, I caught sight of headlights in my rearview mirror approaching from down the street. The man noticed them too, and in a flash, he leapt off my car and took off running toward the oncoming vehicle. Jesus Christ, I muttered, as I floored the accelerator and didn't dare look back until I was halfway home on the freeway. At that point, it was all adrenaline. For a long time after the incident, I stopped doing deliveries at night. I certainly never ventured into that part of downtown again. I now take the longer route home, and I never drive with the windows down at night, especially in areas that are even remotely similar to that one. Reflecting on what I've discovered, I've come to realize how gullible I can be by instinctively placing trust in and following someone simply because they're wearing a uniform. I didn't even pause to question slowing down initially, even though the situation seemed quite dubious in my mind. I found solace in the notion that a seemingly reliable person was on the road. My subconscious thoughts were, oh, great, a public servant is preventing me from making a wrong turn. By the time I stopped, it might have been too late if this individual had any ill intentions. The thought sends shivers down my spine. Eventually, I calmed myself by convincing myself that this man was likely under the influence of something and meant no harm, which I sincerely hope was the case. For my peace of mind, I'm choosing to believe that. However, what unnerved me was the fact that this man was dressed as a road worker and was initially acting in a manner that made me think he was genuine. Why else would he be in that attire, and why was he attempting to flag down cars? I don't know the answer, and I'm relieved I didn't discover what he wanted from me. Let me provide some background. I reside in Michigan, though I won't disclose the specific city. It's an incredibly safe area, virtually free of crime, aside from domestic disputes and occasional theft. Reminiscent of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, I suppose. It's likely for this reason that I believe my friend and I were targeted. Just down the street from my home, there's a semi-arch dog park featuring a playground, some trails, and a large parking lot during the day. It's frequented by numerous people, being an open space surrounded by housing halls. All the adjacent streets are lined with various associations, including mine, which is scarcely a mile away. At night, the park attracts a different crowd because it's both safe and accessible. Many individuals gather there to enjoy themselves in their cars without being bothered, often smoking. My friends and I visited the park for just that reason. We parked our car in the middle of a row, a few spaces away from other vehicles, rolled the windows down slightly, and began chatting and smoking, just as we've done countless times before. The parking lot is shaped like a massive oval. Once you enter, you must circle all the way around to exit. My friend Morgan parked facing the entrance on the opposite side, with a divider in the center, just in case we needed to make a quick escape if the authorities showed up. You never know, but that's enough context. I digress. Morgan and I had been sitting there for about 10 minutes, watching as a few cars passed by. We observed them carefully, wanting to remain constantly aware of our surroundings, perhaps due to a slight sense of paranoia. We maintained vigilance until we saw no potential threats. Eventually, a large, bright yellow truck entered the lot. Now, when I say large, I mean you'd have to climb into this thing. It was impossible to miss. The windows were tinted, making it impossible to see into the cab. The driver navigated the parking lot and headed straight for the exit, neither too slowly nor in a hurry, as if merely turning around. Morgan and I exchanged a few witty remarks about the vehicle as it passed by. Choice in color and moved on. No big deal, right? We sat for another 15 minutes, engaged in a profound and meaningful conversation, and smoked some more. It was nearing midnight, and it was clearly time to head home. Morgan began to steer out of the park, checking both directions on Main Street, and I did the same. However, something immediately caught my attention. The same yellow truck was driving by, heading in the same direction we were. A little background about me. I suffer from severe anxiety, always have and likely always will. This makes me unusually nervous about everyday things. I've had experiences in the past that have made me particularly paranoid. I can get anxious if I see the same person twice at the grocery store, so my reaction to the truck was typical. It stood out to me, and I tried to convince myself that I was being irrational, that noticing it didn't signify danger. I didn't mention anything, and we continued on our way home. The layout of my neighborhood is peculiar, so let me explain to provide some context. There's a long, winding road running through the center, leading straight to the end of the houses. However, branching off from this main road are smaller sections of homes, and mine is the second to last. As we arrived at my house and began our goodbyes, we were both interrupted mid-conversation. We sat silently as that same yellow truck drove past, moving from the exit of my circle into the last circle along the main road. Morgan remarked, "That's the same truck from earlier, right?" I replied, "Yeah, they drove by us when we were leaving the park, too." We watched the entrance, knowing there's no other way out, just one entrance. One moment, he was driving by again on the main road, and I was panicking. Why was this guy here? This truck had never been around before, it was too conspicuous to overlook. So it couldn't possibly be a coincidence. I began pleading with Morgan to come inside, urging her to wait a few more minutes to ensure he left and didn't follow her home. She tried to dismiss my concerns, insisting it was fine and there was no chance he was trailing us. As we debated in the car, the truck pulled into the first entrance of my neighborhood. He parked and switched off the engine, and my anxiety screamed at me to run. There was no way this person wasn't tailing us. Morgan shouted, "Screw this, get inside." We bolted out of the car, and I rifled through my purse, fumbling to find my keys, pleading with any god or demon willing to let my key work and to get us inside now. I don't live alone. My younger sister shares the house with me, and my grandparents were visiting. They would be right inside. The only thing on my mind was that my tough West Virginia redneck grandfather was sitting downstairs with his rifle by his chair, and he would know what to do. With Morgan right behind me, I flung the door open on the first twist of my key, thank God, and we rushed in, slamming the door behind us. Shaking uncontrollably, I hurried down to where my grandfather was, shouting his name in a panic. He jumped up and began calming me and Morgan down. After explaining what had happened, we started to realize how ridiculous we must have sounded. He said we were likely just paranoid from the smoking, but once we settled down, my grandfather offered to investigate. He only needed Morgan to move her car away from the front door. We all agreed to head out together, using the buddy system for safety. Attempting to lighten the mood, we joked about how ridiculous we must have looked, dashing through the door in such a panic. Yet, any sense of security vanished the moment Morgan descended my front steps. She gasped, spun around swiftly, and I barely had a chance to react before she screamed, "He's right there." Apparently, when she glanced around the corner, the truck was driving directly toward us, just a few feet away. We scrambled back inside, and as I shut the door, I saw the truck speed past. We hurried into the house and made our way to the kitchen, which overlooks the circle where my family was peering out the windows. They observed the truck circling back to my house repeatedly on the main road. It felt like we were being hunted in our own home, and a wave of nausea washed over me. I struggled to hold back tears. Yet again, the truck drove off, and my grandfather decided it was time to take action. With a gun in hand, he prepared to leave and asked if I wanted to accompany him. I felt a strong urge to discover what this creep's issue was. We jumped into his car and pulled onto the main road. Almost immediately, we spotted the truck emerging from another circle. I began to panic, shouting out loud, but my grandfather urged me to stay calm and focus. The driver of the truck hadn't noticed our car and was unaware it was us. We observed intently. As he maneuvered the car in a circle past my house and then toward the exit, the very same exit our vehicle was approaching, my stomach tightened with anxiety. My hands shook more violently as we drove toward him. Just as the truck attempted to pull up beside us, My grandfather veered the front of our car directly in front of the truck, illuminating its cab with his high beams. The driver was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses, a balding head, and a plain white t-shirt. He couldn't have looked more unremarkable. I saw him shout something before he reversed and made a full 180-degree turn toward the other exit of the circle, heading back to the main road. My grandfather was determined to get this guy out of here as quickly as possible. He slammed on the gas pedal and accelerated right behind the man, navigating the winding road at 80 miles per hour in a 25 miles per hour zone, an experience that was nothing short of terrifying. We pursued him out of my residential area and down the street, but unfortunately, other cars obstructed our path, and he managed to escape onto the highway. I held myself together until we finally turned around to head home after searching for the truck. Then, I broke down and began to cry. The man I saw bore a striking resemblance to my estranged and abusive father, who was supposed to be several states away. I asked my grandfather if he had seen what I saw, and he simply comforted me by rubbing my back and assuring me that everything would be all right. Once we returned home, we informed the rest of the family, who had witnessed us take off in pursuit of the car. The visibility from the porch was limited. We called the police to file a report, and when the operator first asked for our address, the conversation continued from there. "Are you certain you all don't experience crime over there?" The comment gave me a hearty laugh. The report led nowhere. No one mentioned seeing the truck doing anything suspicious in the area, and we never managed to get a license plate number. There was no explanation as to who this person was or what they wanted. As a sort of side note, my sister and I had an odd moment before everything unfolded. Once things settled down, she confided in me that just before I burst through the door, she had an unsettling feeling, as if something was amiss. She was contemplating whether I was okay. Perhaps it was just intuition, but I like to think there was more to it. Anyway, to the creepy bald guy who seems to take pleasure in stopping attractive young women, you better hope our paths don't cross again. My grandfather is waiting. This unsettling incident took place in July of 1996. I had just completed my service time in the Army and was stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. At midnight, I made the decision to out-process and begin my journey back to Wisconsin. Throughout the day, I was so eager to leave that I struggled to sleep. Finally, at 11:45 p.m., I got out of bed and headed to sign out with the desk sergeant. Knowing that many people wanted to sign out at midnight, he decided to do his rounds. You can't depart until you receive your final sign-off from the sergeant and turn in your key, so I waited. At last, by 2:45 a.m., he returned. I handed over my key, got the sign-off, and by 3:30 a.m., I was on my way. Initially, I was so fueled by adrenaline that I felt I could drive for days. Unfortunately, that burst of energy didn't last long, and by the time I was passing through Dallas, I found myself nodding off. Just past Denton, I decided to pull over at the upcoming stop and take a short nap until daylight broke. Struggling to keep my eyes open, I parked as soon as I found a suitable spot. I exited my vehicle to get some fresh air, dispose of some trash, and take in my surroundings. There were only about 3 other vehicles and 2 semi-trucks parked there. It was a picnic area, not a designated rest stop, so there were no restroom facilities. After discarding my trash, I glanced at a poster featuring a few missing persons but didn't pay much attention to it. I returned to my car, a basic Geo Metro without a radio, power windows, or power locks. I rolled the windows down slightly, turned on the boombox for some music, and lay down to sleep. I had been asleep for nearly 5 or 10 minutes when I felt my car shake slightly. Opening my eyes, I didn't notice anything unusual, so I dismissed it and tried to go back to sleep. Soon after, I heard what sounded like someone tugging at my door handle and scratching at the door's keyhole. Sitting up quickly, I saw no one around. I checked all the windows but didn't spot anyone, so I attributed it to my exhaustion and lay back down, turning off the radio. Despite the sweltering Texas night in July, I was so exhausted that I simply lay back down. A few minutes later, I heard the door handle again, and the car shook more vigorously this time. Sitting up abruptly, I saw a man standing by the passenger side, peering in. Despite the heat and humidity, he wore a red sweatshirt with the hood up, obscuring his face. Young and just out of the military, I shouted at him, "What do you want?" He merely stared at me. I got. Exiting the car, even at just 5 feet 6 inches, I was furious. Yet, he simply strolled towards the picnic tables as if nothing had transpired. I continued shouting that I would confront him if he returned. Deciding it was wiser to leave, I climbed back into my vehicle and resumed my journey. However, nearly 10 miles down the road, fatigue hit me once more. Fortunately, another 10 miles along Route 35, there was a second picnic area. North Texas lacks numerous rest stops, but it does offer these picnic sites. I drove into the area, reversed into a spot for a quick escape if necessary, though I wasn't entirely sure why. I noticed there was only one other car present and no semi-trucks in sight. Once again, I locked the doors, cracked the windows, and switched on my boombox. Sleep came to me almost instantly, but roughly 30 minutes later, a loud thud startled me from my slumber. I jumped up, peering around, but saw no one. Despite my military instincts, which told me it was foolish, I stepped out to investigate and found no one nearby. I chalked it up to my nerves from the earlier encounter. I returned to my car, secured the locks once more, and attempted to relax. Lying there, still on edge, I couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. Suddenly, I opened my eyes and saw the same man in the red sweater, grinning at me with his head tilted up. I frantically tried to open the door to confront him, but the locks on my Geo held firm. He retreated slowly, never breaking his gaze, and by the time I managed to get out, he was already about 30 feet away, obscured by darkness. He seemed slender, yet stood an imposing 6 feet 2 inches or 6 feet 3. Despite feeling, reflecting on my military background, I initially felt confident that I could handle him. Then, I caught sight of something glinting in his hand, possibly a machete. Reacting swiftly, I reached for a baseball bat from the back seat of my car and began shouting at him to come and face me. In retrospect, I'm unsure why I taunted him. As he started advancing toward me, I took a few steps back. Suddenly, a yellow van pulled up rapidly and parked just beside my vehicle. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I noticed 2 more men in hooded sweatshirts inside the van. Before they could exit, I sprinted to my car, grateful it was a stick shift that didn't stall as I sped away. The first man was nearly at my car when I made a sharp right turn and accelerated onto the interstate. I didn't stop until I had crossed about 20 miles into Oklahoma. There, I paused to refuel and use the restroom. Inside, a flyer caught my eye, one I had barely glanced at during my first stop. It displayed several missing persons and cautioned against lingering too long at rest areas. The description of a potential suspect, around 6 feet tall, wearing blue jeans, green shoes, and a red hooded sweatshirt, made my blood run cold. In the daylight hours that followed, I drove the rest of the way to Wisconsin, fully alert. For reasons still unclear to me, I never contacted the number on the flyer or shared the incident with anyone. Now residing in North Texas, I pass those 2 rest areas daily on my commute to work, and thoughts of that night often cross my mind. I wonder if they targeted anyone else or if they were ever apprehended. I attempted to research it online but found no related stories. Just recently, as the sun began its descent, I made the decision to take a drive with my friend Rose up into the mountains. Having grown up on the outskirts of the city, I was well acquainted with the winding mountain roads. Rose, a relatively new acquaintance in my life, had only ventured into the mountains a handful of times before. I was eager to reveal to her the breathtaking view at night, particularly when heading back to the city, and those stunning city lights come into view as you leave the foothills behind. My fondness for eerie videos and horror films might have proved beneficial for us on this specific evening. We set off in my trusty van, a reliable, 03 Toyota that had successfully navigated these routes numerous times before. There's a point where the paved road gives way to gravel, leading you further into the mountains. Right beside this transition from asphalt to gravel is a dirt area where people used to park their trucks and trailers. As Rose and I drove past, I noticed that the pullout was empty, which was typical at this late hour. It was around 10 p.m., the sun had set, and the street lights on timers had all illuminated the town below. I had never observed any lights up there in the mountains. Almost every agricultural field in the area is enclosed with a locked gate marked as private property, often riddled with bullet holes as a warning from the owners, who are generally displeased with those who attempt to trespass. Each field in the mountains is irrigated using a central pivot system, Those long, repeating arc structures with metal frames and wheels that are commonly seen throughout the region. Across the United States as agricultural areas. In various towns, I had observed a few irrigation systems equipped with lights that operated on timers. Initially, I wasn't too taken aback when I spotted a solitary light in a field. We had only traveled about a quarter mile by then. However, I soon realized that not only had this light not been there before, but it was also situated in an incorrect location. "Oh no," I exclaimed, which likely wasn't what Rose wanted to hear during her first nocturnal mountain adventure. "What's wrong?" Rose inquired. "Well, I understand that farmers are in the midst of harvesting, so having a light in the field seems logical. Yet, I've never noticed that specific one before," I replied, gesturing toward the area where a peculiar amber light shone at the field's edge. The darkness obscured any fences or the surrounding boulders from view, but I was familiar enough with the terrain to recognize it as the boundary of a property. I began tapping on the wheel nervously, my mind a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. I was eager to continue because the mountains would be breathtaking under the half moon, and Rose had never experienced them at night. Simultaneously, my mind reminded me that if I was going to indulge in listening to countless hours of horror stories each month, I ought to derive some insight from them. "I'm sorry, Rose. I would continue if those were tractor headlights, but I've never seen just one light positioned there, especially in that field. It's never been cultivated, so it seems illogical to expend energy or money illuminating it," I explained. Rose, being incredibly understanding, didn't mind that we had barely covered a quarter of a mile before we turned back toward the asphalt. I wasn't sure why, but it felt as though an invisible clock had suddenly started ticking. "Hey, Rose, could you hold onto the handle, please? I'm going to accelerate enough that you might want to grip something." "I promise we're safe," I assured her. Rose quietly grasped the overhead handle on the passenger side, and I increased our speed. There was an undeniable urgency pressing me to hurry, so I did just that, zooming back toward the asphalt as fast as I dared. My anxiety only grew as we arrived at the truck parking area. There was a white truck and a flatbed trailer that hadn't been there just 10 minutes earlier. About 6 men surrounded the truck, its headlights glaring. One guy was reversing an ATV off the flatbed trailer at such a speed that I feared he might collide with one of his companions. As I sped past, someone ran behind the car. I turned onto a road leading to a main highway. "Rose," I asked while accelerating to 70 miles per hour, "were those people there when we passed?" "Earlier? I just need to make sure I'm not imagining things." "No," Rose replied. I exhaled, mimicking her calm tone, even as I pushed the speed to 75 miles per hour and checked the rearview mirror. As far as I could see, they weren't pursuing us, but we had 8 miles of straight, flat road without any cover before reaching civilization. "Did they seem like they were in a rush to you?" I asked. With no other traffic in sight, we didn't have to slow down for anyone, which was a relief. We both tried to maintain our composure, though she chuckled nervously, glancing over her shoulder to ensure no cars were approaching. Fortunately, no one appeared. We drove to a bustling restaurant and stayed in the car, attempting to calm ourselves. We pondered why this man had suddenly appeared in the middle of the night. Rose speculated that perhaps their friends were camping and had encountered trouble. However, all the land in the mountains is privately owned, so camping there is prohibited. I'm relieved Rose and I left when we did, sparing us from discovering why 6 men felt compelled to ascend the mountain in the dead of night. After high school, I realized that some of the most satisfying purchases often stem from the most aggravating transactions. When I was around 17, I decided to obtain my driver's license because I was weary of spending so much time at home with my parents. They weren't unpleasant people, but my mom had a habit of vocally debating with a political news channel, often with my dad chiming in, which quickly became tiresome. Once I acquired my license, I initially used a texting service called Qwerty. However, when it went out of business, I found myself without a phone. Since my parents considered a cell phone essential, it fell on me to buy one. They agreed to finance it, and I would repay them by doing chores around the house. I had to manage all the logistics of acquiring it myself. Although I didn't live in a dangerous area, the Radio Shack I needed to visit was located in a more dubious part of town, known for its escorts and dealers. While I had never heard of, nobody was getting hurt, but the atmosphere was undeniably off. A particular apartment complex on the route to Radio Shack was infamously dangerous, a notorious hotspot for addicts. At Radio Shack, the purchasing process was unnecessarily convoluted. The young woman who initially assisted me not only activated the wrong phone but also managed to break it. It was a lengthy ordeal, yet eventually, everything got sorted out. They advised me to set up security on my new phone and add a backup passcode. I chose one of those swipe pattern codes and promptly forgot it as soon as I got back into my dad's truck. It was around 8 p.m. when I reached the intersection near the infamous apartments, heading west. The road was nearly deserted, with only 2 other vehicles also moving westward. When I stopped at a red light behind an orange PT Cruiser, a truck turned right, and a man stood at the northwest corner, waiting to cross east past us. The light turned green, but the PT Cruiser remained stationary. I waited a moment before honking my horn, which caused the car in front to back up slightly, sending me into a panic. In my confusion, I didn't shift the car into reverse. Instead, I put it in park and frantically pressed the gas, but the car refused to budge. I struggled to find the correct gear, and by the time I figured it out, the PT Cruiser had already taken off. The man who had been waiting to cross then approached my vehicle. He stood about 5 feet 6 inches, slim with long limbs, and his sunken face gave him a zombie-like appearance. His expression was twisted in anger, and he wore a dirty, neutral-colored hoodie. As he approached, I noticed how covered in blood he was. It was difficult to determine the extent of his injuries because his face was obscured with grime and blood. As he attempted to open the driver's side door, I finally succeeded in shifting the truck into neutral. The vehicle emitted a peculiar noise that startled him, yet it still didn't budge. He then pressed his face against the window, appearing as though blood was streaming from his eyes. Despite this, he showed no signs of pain while pulling on the handle. I eventually managed to find the correct gear, even though I was terrified. I didn't want to hurt him by speeding off too quickly, but when he brandished a gun, I screamed, slammed on the gas, and inadvertently dragged him a short distance as his arm got caught on the side mirror. He yelled and released his grip, allowing me to speed off at 60 miles per hour towards my house. Arriving home in a state of sheer panic, my mother reprimanded me for bursting in. As I struggled to explain, I felt so overwhelmed that I began to vomit and had to rush to the bathroom. After I recounted the situation, my parents were dubious and thought I might be exaggerating, prompting them to contact the police. The dispatcher informed us that I wasn't the only one reporting a man with bleeding eyes. Shortly thereafter, a deputy arrived at our door. My mother, still suspecting I might have fabricated the entire incident, insisted I speak with him. I provided a description and showed him the bloodied face print on the truck's window. The police collected a sample, and later confirmed they had apprehended a suspect who matched my description. The man had roots R. injury and a dislocated shoulder, yet he was in no immediate peril. He appeared on the local news, connected to a series of attempted carjackings while high on cocaine. Eventually, he was convicted on a drug charge, and since then, I haven't heard any further developments about him. Nearly 29 years ago, after finishing high school, I relocated to Saitama, a prefecture in Japan neighboring Tokyo. A few months after settling in, I purchased a used car, which was almost essential for getting around. I found great pleasure in taking lengthy, soothing drives after work, accompanied by music and cigarettes. One night, during an especially prolonged drive through the mountains, surrounded by nothing but darkness and the sound of cicadas, something unsettling happened. I usually drove with the windows down, especially the driver's side, since I was smoking. As I navigated the dim, isolated road, I heard a scream. It wasn't an ordinary scream, it was the blood-curdling, chilling cry of a child. The memory of that sound still haunts me today, so much so that I hesitate to speak about it. Instinctively, I slammed on the brakes. I've never been one to believe in the paranormal, always relying on my 5 senses, but something felt undeniably wrong. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the road and stepped out, feeling the cold shivers racing up my spine. It was the dead of night, and there seemed to be no logical explanation for what I had heard. Scanning the area as best as I could with my car's headlights piercing through the dark forest ahead, I was overwhelmed with fear and paranoia, trembling uncontrollably. The reaction was one I'd only heard about in stories, but now I knew it to be real. Apart from the sound of my own heartbeat and the soft shuffle of my feet on the dirt road, the night was eerily silent. I tried to convince myself it was merely an auditory hallucination, perhaps due to exhaustion. Hearing nothing further, I decided to drive home, attempting to leave the incident behind me. 3 weeks later, while watching TV, the same mountain roads and passes appeared on the screen. The newscaster reported that Suomu Miyazaki had confessed to murder, pinpointing the crime scene to the authorities. It became evident that the scream I heard, though not occurring in real time, might have been a distant echo of past horrors. That scream was no ordinary one. It was what I can only describe as a scream marking the end of life, filled with terror and despair. The area where I had pulled over was shown on screen, the very site of unspeakable acts. As the details of Miyazaki's crimes were later documented by the media and by him, the full extent of the horror unfolded. Should you look up Suomu Miyazaki, you'll find chilling details, but I refuse to give his actions any further acknowledgement here. That experience profoundly altered me. I never ventured out on nighttime drives in the woods again. The echo of that scream and the grim reality of what transpired in those mountains have stayed with me ever since. I was about 8 years old when this incident occurred, and although my memory of the event itself is fragmented, I vividly remember how my mom reacted, which indicates just how serious it was. I was traveling with my mother and younger sister on a road trip through Wyoming. This was a regular activity for us since we had relatives scattered throughout the state, and my mom enjoyed taking long drives. Anyone acquainted with Wyoming understands that the roads can often be quite empty. On this particular day, we had been trailing an older green and white truck for several hours. As we approached a gas station, my little sister became excited about getting one of those wax juice bottles she adored. The green and white truck pulled into the gas station just ahead of us. We stopped as well, used the restroom, grabbed some snacks, and my mom refueled the car. Soon, we were back on the road. Not long after, from the driver's seat, my mom asked if the truck behind us was the same one we had followed into the gas station. I turned around and confirmed that it was indeed the same vehicle, then settled back into my seat, continuing to enjoy my snacks. However, I could sense my mom's growing unease. She kept glancing at the truck in the rearview mirror. For the next stretch of road, the truck would speed up, getting dangerously close to us, then slow down again, repeating this pattern for several miles. As we neared another gas station, my mom spoke with a seriousness that immediately alarmed me. "I'm going to pull in and open my door as if I'm getting out." "I don't want you to open your doors. Don't get out. Just sit tight and hang on," she instructed. My sister and I exchanged puzzled looks, sensing the tension but not fully understanding the situation. Fully grasping the seriousness of the situation, we pulled into the station and up to a pump. My mom kept an eye on the truck through the rearview mirror as it pulled in and parked to the side of the entrance. The driver, a large man, opened his hood, got out, and began tinkering beneath it with his back turned to us. Sensing the opportunity, my mom seized the moment. She slammed her door shut and sped off. I twisted in my seat, watching as the man turned abruptly, startled by the screech of her tires. He quickly shut his hood and stared at us as we drove away. My mom drove faster than I had ever seen her drive before. The road ahead curved sharply, and just before reaching the bend, she slammed on the brakes, yanked the steering wheel to the right, and skillfully maneuvered the car around the corner into a small parking lot behind a building. We were concealed from the road but could still see the green and white truck speeding past, leaving us terrified. We sat in silence until my mom broke it, asking if anyone needed to use the restroom. I said yes, but she decided it was safer to wait and drive to the next station. Then she said something that has stayed with me ever since, completely out of character for her. "I'd rather wet my pants in this car than be murdered on the side of this road." We eventually continued our journey and never saw the green and white truck again. This chilling experience, driven by my mother's quick thinking and fierce protective instincts, remains vivid in my memory. A stark reminder of the dangers that can lurk on desolate roads back around April. In 2005, I was leaving a friend's house and heading home. He lived near Lake Ariel in Lane County, Pennsylvania, and I was about 1.5 miles away. To save time and avoid any police encounters, I chose to take the back roads. As I crossed Mountain Road, I noticed a van off to the side with its doors open and lights on. It was well past midnight, and there wasn't a soul on the road. I slowed down my 1989 VW convertible to first gear, scanning for any individuals who might be injured. The woods were eerily quiet, and although the van was not running, every light was on, including the one on the open driver's door. I remember thinking to myself that I wouldn't have cell service until I reached the top of the mountain, where I could call the authorities. So, I continued towards the area where I knew I'd have reception, driving at a cautious 30 miles per hour at most. The situation felt off, but it quickly escalated. Just a few miles down the road, as the brush along the roadside thinned, offering a clearer view of the woods, I noticed movement. Easing off the gas, worried about possibly hitting a deer, I suddenly saw a man emerge from the tree line, drenched in fresh blood. At first, I couldn't even tell it was a man due to the extent of the gore covering him. He stumbled into the road, frantically waving me down. In my convertible, with the top down, he was shouting and reaching for my door. Terrified by his bloodied appearance and desperate actions, I shifted into first gear and sped off. After about another mile, I finally had cell service and promptly called the police. The man was clearly injured, and his grabbing at my door had unnerved me. There was a wide open area on the mountain where I agreed to wait for the authorities. The police officers arrived at the scene in less than 10 minutes. While I waited, I raised the convertible top and secured the doors. An officer took my statement and examined my car with a flashlight. The man from the woods had smeared a trail of blood down my door. Another officer discovered the van, but they couldn't track down the individual who had emerged from the forest. The police permitted me to go home, assuring me they would contact me if they needed more information. Within a few days, I received a call. They informed me the van was stolen and inquired if I could provide a description of the man. They never found him that night, and as far as I know, they still haven't. The van was indeed stolen, and it seemed the man had bandaged himself and fled in a state of panic. To this day, I remain vigilant, watching for a bloody figure sprinting out of the woods. This experience has left a lasting impression on me, and it is entirely true. I've been in a relationship with my girlfriend for a few years now. She's a petite blonde with an unfailingly optimistic outlook on life. We attend different colleges, hers in New Hampshire and mine in Massachusetts. Since she doesn't own a car, I drive up to visit her in my old, little red car, a gift from my grandmother. While I'm not particularly fond of the car, I can't complain since it was free. I've never had any problems with the hour-and-a-half drive until a few weeks ago when I got more than I anticipated. I was visiting my girlfriend, and the day was already going poorly. We wanted some privacy in her dorm room, but her roommate wouldn't leave, so we spent time in the common room instead. After spending most of the day together, we eventually decided it was time for me to return to my own college. I bid her farewell and promised to text her once I got back. It was 6 p.m., and the sky was growing quite dim, as is typical in winter. I usually opt for the New Hampshire back roads for a more picturesque journey and to steer clear of traffic. This choice doesn't impact the travel time, which is definitely a bonus. Those familiar with New Hampshire are aware that many back roads lack proper street lighting or aren't illuminated at all. However, this isn't too much of an issue since I can just switch on my high beams. About 30 minutes into the drive, I turned onto a road that resembled a wide path. The GPS indicated I would be traveling straight for about 7 miles, and having some idea of what New Hampshire roads can be like, I didn't think much of it. The street was just wide enough for a car and a half, flanked by woods, and completely devoid of streetlights. After driving about 3 or 4 miles, I noticed a man in my high beams standing in the middle of the road, waving my car down and signaling for help. The road wasn't wide enough for me to maneuver around him, so I had no choice but to stop. The man approached my driver's side window and motioned for me to roll it down. Not thinking entirely clearly, I lowered my window halfway. He appeared to be an average man in his early to mid-40s, but there was something unsettling about him. He explained that he was experiencing car trouble and asked if I could get out and assist him. Now, I am a 19-year-old. The stranger was a young man with an average build, none of my physical traits. Despite my complete lack of automotive knowledge, I confessed to him that I had no understanding of cars whatsoever. I offered that if he genuinely required assistance, all I could do was call a mechanic or a tow truck. He persistently gestured towards his black, rusted pickup truck, urging me to get out and help him. This situation began to unsettle me, sending chills down my spine, and I was uncertain about what to do next. It was then that I noticed someone crouching behind the truck. The man was oblivious to this, but internally, I started to panic. My instincts for fight or flight kicked in, and I decided to attempt something daring. I informed the man that I would pull over on the side of the road ahead and then get out to see how I could assist him. This seemed to appease him, and he began to smile, stepping back from my car. Seizing the moment, I pressed the gas pedal as hard as I could, speeding away. As I glanced in my rearview mirror, I saw both men walking into the middle of the road and then just standing there. I continued to drive as fast as possible until I exited the road. I reached a nearby gas station and stopped to call the police. I recounted my experience to the dispatcher and inquired if I needed to stay for questioning. They assured me that they would send officers to investigate the street and that I was free to continue my journey. Afterward, I called my girlfriend and recounted what had happened. She was simply relieved that I was safe. I have no idea what those men's intentions were. Whether they genuinely had car troubles or were planning to carjack me, or something even worse, remains a mystery. Needless to say, after that unnerving night, I have vowed never to navigate those back roads alone in the dark again. Although this incident occurred nearly 2 decades ago, it remains etched in my memory for a lifetime. During my college years, I attended a small institution nestled in a quaint town in northwestern Maryland. Our campus was cradled by the foothills of the Catoctin Mountains. My friends and I frequently explored the mountainous terrain, growing increasingly familiar with the winding roads over time. However, the events of this story unfolded before we had mastered these routes, right at the beginning of our academic journey. One evening, several of my girlfriends and I decided to head out for a drive. The roads we traveled were serpentine and narrow, with sections that precipitously dropped off the mountain's edge. Given the late hour, we were particularly cautious, rarely encountering other vehicles, which suited us perfectly. Yet, on that particular night, as we pulled into a parking lot, another car entered as well. We didn't dwell on it, assuming the driver was simply seeking solitude. As we ventured onto the back roads, the other car temporarily disappeared from view. However, as we delved deeper into the mountains, it reappeared behind us, following closely. Our anxiety escalated, especially since we were not yet acquainted with these remote, unpaved paths that offered no opportunity to turn around. I drove as swiftly as possible, all of us panicking and convinced the person behind us harbored sinister intentions. Eventually, a chapel with a parking lot came into view. We quickly pulled in and turned back to face the road, just in time to see a man with striking red hair drove past us slowly, his eyes fixed on us intently. We hurriedly made our way down the mountain, parked the car, and contacted public safety to report the incident. The following day, we received an email from campus security advising us to be vigilant for a man with red hair, glasses, and a beard. This individual had reportedly been attempting to enter campus buildings and was trailing women around the area. Although our escape might seem uneventful since we managed it with ease, I am utterly convinced that if he had caught up with us while we were parked, we might have vanished without a trace. I had arranged for a taxi from a reputable taxi company to transport me from a friend's residence to my home in the early evening. The sky was dusky as the driver arrived. As I exited the house to get into the vehicle, he approached the house to meet me. For an inexplicable reason, as he turned back towards his car with me in tow, he briefly touched my shoulder with his hand. The touch was not lingering, yet it was intentional. My immediate reaction was, "Why is this man touching my shoulder?" My instincts signaled that something was amiss, but being in my 20s, I rationalized that it might be a generational gesture. The driver was an older Muslim man with a pronounced Middle Eastern accent. I settled into the back seat. The journey was supposed to take approximately 20 minutes, traveling from North to South London. During the initial 5 minutes of the trip, we engaged in some small talk. He mentioned that I was his last fare for the day and that he had no further plans afterward. When he revealed this, a jolt of fear shot through me, but I convinced myself that it was nothing to worry about. The man was affiliated with a reputable licensing firm. His identity had been verified and he was authorized to perform the task. His identification card, complete with his name, photograph, and registration number, was prominently displayed on the dashboard. This firm was one that my friend consistently used and maintained an account with, even though she had never encountered this specific driver. My rational mind reassured me that his details were easily traceable to me, diminishing any likelihood that he would take any undue risk. Furthermore, it was early evening in a bustling area, which contributed to my sense of security. By then, we were already en route. For the subsequent 15 minutes or so of the journey, I was preoccupied with my phone. I can't quite pinpoint why. Perhaps I was subconsciously attempting to distract myself due to a sense of nervousness, although I felt my anxiety was unwarranted. Considering it was the early 2000s, the phone was quite basic compared to today's devices, yet there must have been some game or feature that captured my attention. Consequently, I didn't look out the window for a while. When I finally did, I expected to find myself nearing my home. To my dismay, I realized we were in an unfamiliar, desolate part of town that I had never seen before. This area was definitely not on the route from my friend's house to my own. The drive should have been a straightforward journey through central London, yet we found ourselves in this very isolated area, surrounded by what appeared to be an abandoned housing estate and derelict vehicles. I turned to the driver to inquire about our location, but before I could voice my question, I noticed he was repeatedly glancing. As we turned left and right, navigating the dimly lit alleyways, I noticed our pace was slowing. His breathing was peculiar, almost exaggeratedly audible, which heightened my sense of unease. A sudden, overwhelming feeling of impending danger washed over me. It became clear that he was searching for a secluded spot to pull over, and a voice in my head unmistakably warned me that he intended to harm me, perhaps even kill me. I needed to act swiftly. Without much deliberation, I blurted out something along the lines of not knowing our location. He remained silent, so I quickly added that my friend expected me to call her once I was safely home. I emphasized that I should already be there, and if I didn't contact her soon, she would alert his company and the police because she tended to overreact in such situations. This seemed to snap him back to reality, making him reconsider whatever sinister intentions he might have had. During those early days of mobile phones, not everyone possessed one, especially older individuals. It was perhaps a lifeline he hadn't anticipated I could use. With that, he turned the car around, steering us away from the desolate area and onto a main road. Gradually, familiar landmarks appeared, and we headed toward my home. He apologized, saying, "I'm sorry if I made you worried," but there was something unsettling about his tone, suggesting this wasn't the end of our encounter. Approaching my residence, I decided against letting him drop me off directly at my door. I lived with my sister, but she was spending the night at her boyfriend's place. Our residence was within a communal building, and I feared he might attempt to follow me inside through the main entrance. I asked him to drop me off at the store on the next street, and he had no choice but to agree. I went into the store and lingered for a while. I remember being completely broke back then. My friend had covered the fare with her account. After a few minutes, I exited the store and made the short 3 to 4 minute walk back to my apartment. As I neared my building, I noticed a car parked facing the main entrance. My heart sank as I realized, oh my God, it's him. I knew he could tell I hadn't bought anything since I didn't even have a bag with me, so he would realize I had been lying. As I passed by the car, I couldn't bring myself to look back at him. Instead, I hurriedly got my keys, quickened my steps, and swiftly entered my apartment. Once inside, I mustered the courage to glance out the window, and sure enough, it was him. He had driven from where he had dropped me off and was now sitting in his car, staring at my building. Just then, my friend called, and I told her I had only just arrived home. She was astonished at how long it had taken. I recounted the entire incident to her over the phone. As we spoke, I looked out the window again and saw that he had finally left. At the time, I didn't report any of this, and from the perspective of 20 years on, I regret that decision. Yet, even then, I questioned my intuition, despite the strong feeling of certainty I had at the moment. Afterward, I convinced myself it was just a moment of fleeting hysteria, and my logical mind took over. He told me that if I dared to report him, nothing would come of it because he hadn't technically done anything wrong. I had no tangible evidence, and even if he confessed to taking the detour, he could simply claim he made an innocent mistake. He would deny ever returning to my apartment. Reporting him might have stirred up trouble for him, and he knew my address, which frightened me even more. After that, I was perpetually wary around my apartment, and thankfully, I never saw him again. Reflecting on it now, and understanding more about grooming tactics, I realize I should have reported the incident. I know nothing would have likely been done because nearly every level of government had been concealing these offenses for years. My actions might have increased the risk to my safety, but I should have reported it for the sake of others. I regret not taking that step. This incident occurred a few years ago when I was working as a bartender during my college days. I was driving home along a divided highway at approximately 3 a.m. when I spotted a car coming towards me in the wrong lane. Initially, I questioned my perception, thinking perhaps the vehicle was on the opposite side of the highway. However, a white Ford sedan zoomed past me at an alarming speed. It's important to mention that I also drive a white Ford sedan. Being accustomed to encountering intoxicated and reckless drivers late at night, I pulled over to the side of the road to let him pass. Then, I had a moment of clarity and decided to contact the police, realizing that this individual could potentially harm themselves or others. After providing the dispatcher with the road and mile marker details, the details, they mentioned they would dispatch a vehicle. The state police station was merely a few exits away, so I presumed they would quickly send someone and continued my journey home. As I merged back onto the highway, I noticed some lights a few miles behind me. Living in a rural area of southeastern Pennsylvania, I knew that traffic at 3 a.m. typically consisted of truckers and law enforcement. The car rapidly closed the distance as I accelerated, so I remained in the right lane, anticipating it would overtake me. Instead, they switched on their high beams, making driving uncomfortable, and began tailgating me aggressively. At this juncture, I assumed I would be pulled over by the police, given that I had earlier reported a suspicious white Ford sedan. I reached for my registration in the glove compartment. Unexpectedly, the vehicle behind me came to a sudden halt, slamming on the brakes in the middle of the highway. They must have turned off their car because the lights vanished, and I spotted what appeared to be the same Ford sedan as before. Even then, I considered it might be a police vehicle, and they could have misconstrued my actions as reaching for a weapon. In a state of panic, I called 911 again and asked the dispatcher if they had dispatched a cruiser to investigate. The dispatcher, somewhat curt with me, reassured me they had indeed sent someone. I explained that a car was following me and behaving erratically. It might be a cop, and I feared I had startled them by retrieving my registration. The dispatcher attempted to contact the trooper they had dispatched as the car accelerated towards me. The car tailgated me closely, halting just inches from my bumper, their high beams glaring intensely. They abruptly hit their brakes, prompting me to inform the dispatcher that I was fairly certain this wasn't a police vehicle behind me. The car accelerated back to my bumper and switched on their high beams once more, this time blaring their horn. The dispatcher inquired about the situation, and I relayed that the blaring horn was coming from the vehicle tailing me, and I doubted it was a police officer. I resolved that I didn't mind being pulled over, so I began to accelerate. If they activated their lights, I would then pull over. I attempted to signal for an exit and then quickly change direction, but they pursued me as I took the off-ramp and continued onto the on-ramp. The car trailed me the entire time. I contemplated driving to a populated gas station in southern Pennsylvania, as it seemed to be the only place with people at that hour. However, both the dispatcher and I agreed it might not be safe. She remained calm and consulted with another person, presumably a supervisor, trying to dispatch police to my location. The supervisor suggested that I head to the state police station, which was just one exit away. I informed her of my plan to go there, and she assured me that some troopers would meet me outside. As I exited, the car continued to follow. I ran a few red lights in my haste to reach the police station, and the car attempted to maneuver into another lane to either overtake me or pull up alongside. Once the station came into sight, I activated my turn signal, and the car behind me suddenly slammed on its brakes, switched off its lights, and then veered into a parking lot. King lot. The tale concludes in a somewhat anticlimactic fashion as I arrived at the police station and encountered the troopers. Two of them proceeded to locate the car while I remained with the third officer. I expressed my gratitude to the dispatcher and supervisor, and subsequently, a state trooper accompanied me home after obtaining my statement. I was never contacted for a follow-up or to testify, which leads me to presume that the individual was never apprehended. Now, as an elderly man, I recount this event from my youth, hoping it might benefit someone. One evening, I drove to a secluded tourist spot and parked in its lot. I was by myself with no particular plans for the night. Around 8 p.m., a wave of drowsiness washed over me, and I eventually succumbed to sleep. I'm unaware of how long I slept, but I was roused by a tapping sound at my window. As I awoke with a stiff neck, I turned my gaze toward the source of the tapping. There stood a young woman by my driver's side door, tapping urgently at the glass. She appeared to be alone. Still disoriented and groggy, I heard her voice. I slightly cracked the window open, and she begged desperately for help, imploring me to unlock the door. She claimed a man had been pursuing her. Despite having just woken up, I was convinced of the situation's authenticity. For a fleeting moment, the thought crossed my mind that I might be witnessing a ghost, but that notion quickly dissipated. This was real, and it was unfolding right before me. I rushed to unlock and open the door to assist her, yet something held me back. There was an oddity: her hair, makeup, and attire were impeccably arranged. Her appearance was immaculate. Not a strand of hair was out of place, and her makeup remained flawlessly intact. Despite having supposedly been pursued, she showed no signs of perspiration. Although she appeared frantic and terrified, there was an air of artificiality about her demeanor, as if she had rehearsed her lines before arriving, as though it were all a performance. From the interior of my car, I scanned the surroundings and noticed the absence of both people and vehicles in the parking lot. I felt a mix of fear and the urge to assist her, empathizing with how I would feel if she were in my situation or if she were a relative of mine. However, skepticism lingered. I couldn't fully accept her narrative. I started the engine, contemplating using my headlights to verify her story. Nothing appeared in front of my car, but as I adjusted the rearview mirror, something unusual caught my attention. I spotted several figures, seemingly male based on their silhouettes, crouched behind my vehicle like athletes poised at the starting line. Once the woman realized I had noticed them, she quickly glanced back at them. Without hesitation, I pressed the gas pedal and accelerated away from the area. Initially, driving proved challenging because I had earlier reclined my seat for a nap. Once I was at a safe distance from the parking lot, I checked the time and realized it was just after 2 a.m. It dawned on me that those men had likely been attempting to conceal themselves in my blind spot, fully aware of their actions. Had I unlocked the door, I might have been robbed, or something far worse could have occurred. That night served as a lesson, urging me to park in well-lit areas near surveillance cameras. Nowadays, I prefer parking in the center of parking lots. From that day forward, I have always been cautious. Oh, I had an unsettling feeling about him that I couldn't quite explain. Even at such a tender age, I sensed something was off about this stranger, and it made me uneasy. My mom, always attuned to my instincts, immediately noticed my hesitation. She glanced at the man, and I could see her expression shift from relaxed to cautious. She gently guided me towards the restroom, her grip on my hand tightening ever so slightly. The man, seemingly disinterested in any pretense of subtlety, watched us with a keen interest that made my skin crawl. The rest area, usually a mundane stop on our frequent road trips, suddenly felt charged with an uncomfortable tension. Inside the restroom, my mom whispered to me, reassuring me that everything was fine but advising me to stay close. Her calm demeanor was a testament to her protective nature, always ensuring I felt secure no matter the situation. We quickly finished our business and returned to the car, the unsettling man still lingering nearby, his eyes following our every move. Once safely inside the vehicle, my mom locked the doors with a deliberate click that seemed to echo in the quiet of the afternoon. She started the car, and we drove away, the man growing smaller in the rearview mirror until he was nothing more than a distant, unsettling memory. Reflecting on the incident years later, my mom would often recount how she trusted her instincts that day, and how grateful she was for the intuition that saved us from a potentially dangerous encounter. It was a lesson in vigilance and the importance of listening to one's gut feelings, a lesson that has stayed with me throughout my life. Switched to her other hand, positioning myself away from the man. Reflecting on it later, my mom realized that even at such a young age, I had sensed some danger and instinctively wanted to keep as much distance from the man as possible. I hastened my steps both to the restroom and back to the car, behavior that was completely out of character for me when dealing with strangers. Upon returning to the vehicle, the man had retreated to his own car but began tailing us as soon as we drove away. My mom quickly recognized that we were being followed and attempted to shake him off on the highway. Despite her efforts, he persisted, relentlessly trying to close the gap between our cars. During this tense moment, a semi-truck driver noticed the erratic nature of my mom's driving and the evident desperation, even from his position behind us. Grasping the seriousness of the situation, he pulled up beside us, and he and my mom exchanged a look that conveyed their mutual understanding. The truck driver then reached out to other drivers via his radio, explaining our predicament. Several truckers from nearby routes converged on our highway, strategically maneuvering to block the man's car, effectively isolating him from us. My mom seized this opportunity to exit the highway, heading towards another rest stop, with the original truck driver closely following behind. Once we were safe, the truck driver approached us to ensure we were okay and even accompanied us to a nearby Burger King for a meal. We conversed for a while, and he stayed with us on the road until it was safe for us to continue our journey. As we part ways, I remain endlessly thankful to that truck driver and the others who came to our assistance, likely saving our lives. Thank you. I lived in a county that was quite rural until about 10 to 15 years ago. The largest town in our county has since become overcrowded, and I find it unappealing. I relocated from there to the countryside, which I enjoy, except at night when it can be quite eerie. For miles, it's pitch dark, devoid of streetlights. One characteristic of this county is that the main roads become congested quickly, especially when there's an accident, so it's advantageous to take the back roads. Like any rural area, these roads are less populated, darker, and bordered by numerous trees, and they lack sidewalks. A few years ago, an incident nearly made me stop using these roads altogether. I was driving home late one night and decided to take a specific back road that shaved 10 minutes off my journey home. I was exhausted and needed to rise early, so I was speeding in an effort to get home quickly. This road is slightly more popular than some others, but it becomes quite spooky in certain sections because massive trees line the roadside, and their branches and leaves create towering shadows. As I zipped along and rounded a curve, I saw what I initially believed was a giant garden flag, the type people display in their yards during spring. It seemed odd because it was rather tall and large and positioned right in the middle of the road. As I approached and my headlights illuminated the object, I realized it wasn't a flag at all. It was a person, a lady wearing a red dress, standing in the rural darkness. In Maryland, encountering someone like Fizz is not an everyday occurrence. She wore a long, flowing white dress paired with an orange reflective sash draped across her chest, which seemed odd given her location in the middle of the street. As I drove by, the situation only grew more bizarre. Despite the darkness, I could discern that she was around 60, wore glasses, and had strikingly bright blue eyes. She peered into my passenger window and began performing this peculiar balancing act. I was convinced she might attempt to enter my car, even though I was traveling at a considerable speed. There was something about her that unnerved me profoundly. It wasn't that I feared she would mug me, rather, I was genuinely convinced she was some kind of soul snatcher or a skinwalker. I didn't believe she was human. Her presence was indescribably eerie. I accelerated past her as quickly as I could, repeatedly checking my backseat to ensure she hadn't somehow appeared inside my vehicle. I prayed, recited scripture, and kept a vigilant eye on my rearview mirror. Although it was spring and should have been a bit warmer, a bone-chilling cold enveloped me. When I finally reached home, I rushed to share the story with my mom. As I entered, I realized my brother was already recounting his encounter with the strange woman to our mother. He had seen the same woman while driving, but at the intersection leading from the highway to the back road, whereas I had encountered her further along the road. We both reacted similarly. She also attempted to peer into his car and was bouncing around as he passed by. He mentioned that the car in front of him had sped off in a hurry when they drove past her. My brother was so shaken by the experience that he wouldn't. During my travels, I discovered that a woman resides in the woods. It seems that her family once lived on that road. Her father fell gravely ill, and she attempted to take him to the hospital, but he passed away en route. She drove around for hours with his body in the car. I suppose she has mental health concerns, and it appears she lost her home or was evicted. I have friends who live nearby, and when I mentioned it, they immediately knew who she was. Although I still drive on that road, I haven't encountered her since. I sincerely hope she is alright, but I really don't want to cross paths with her again. Years ago, during a Memorial Day weekend, I had a nerve-wracking drive from Las Vegas to Los Angeles with two friends. After a long weekend of partying in Vegas, we faced what is normally a 5-hour drive through the desert. However, during busy weekends, it can stretch to 7 or even 9 hours. Our friends, who were flying out, urged us to stay longer to dodge the traffic. We indulged in a buffet and relaxed by the pool, hoping to recover before leaving at 3 p.m., with the expectation of being home by 8 p.m. Unfortunately, 2 accidents and heavy traffic greatly delayed us. It took us 6 hours just to reach Barstow, a journey that typically takes about 2 hours. After stopping to refuel and grab some coffee, we continued our trip at 10 p.m. More traffic and a wrong turn later, it was 2:30 a.m. We were passing through Santa Clarita, about 45 minutes from our destination, when suddenly there was. The noise was deafening, reminiscent of metal tearing apart before bursting into fragments. I managed to steer the car off the highway onto a side street and contacted roadside assistance. They estimated a 30-minute wait, which seemed tolerable given the situation. The area was surrounded by several gated communities, yet the road we found ourselves on was deserted, acting as a thoroughfare between these neighborhoods. About 15 minutes later, I was startled awake by an SUV passing in the opposite direction, carrying roughly 4 passengers, all of whom were staring at us intently. Shortly afterward, roadside assistance called back to inform me of a mix-up. They had mistakenly thought I was in Santa Clara, 6 hours north in the San Francisco region. They said it would take another hour for help to arrive. We decided to try to get some rest again, but about half an hour later, the same SUV sped by, shining a light into my car, which aroused my suspicions. For safety, I always kept a utility knife and a small bat beneath my seat. I grabbed the knife and handed the bat to my friend in the passenger seat, who was groggy and bewildered. 15 minutes later, the SUV parked approximately 300 feet behind us, turned off its lights, and its occupants began conversing animatedly, which heightened our anxiety as we were stranded and outnumbered. As we sat there, developing strategies and grappling with fear, I observed 2 large men in black clothing exiting the SUV. One leaned against the grill, smoking a cigarette while fixating his gaze on us, and the other relieved himself on the sidewalk. It felt like psychological warfare. Eventually, the tension continued to build. Anger concluded his conversation with the driver, and shortly after, 2 additional figures emerged from the vehicle, one of slight build and the other more robust. They began making their way towards us. In anticipation, I gripped my knife, my friend prepared to defend with a bat, and my other companion tightened his fists, bracing for an encounter. They halted approximately halfway as the tow truck's headlights appeared in the distance. Abruptly, they retreated to their SUV and hastily drove away just as the tow operator arrived. We didn't return home until 5 a.m., and we remained uncertain about the group's intentions. Perhaps they assumed the car was deserted and aimed to steal it, or they harbored other malevolent plans. If they realized we were inside, they might have misidentified my long-haired friend in the backseat as a woman. The ordeal was intense, and the lesson I derived is to avoid leaving Vegas late at night if you're driving. I once picked up a hitchhiker who turned out to be genuinely unstable. I will never repeat that mistake, and hopefully, my story serves as a warning to you. I reside in a foreign country, and I'm not familiar with your country's health measures against the epidemic, but at that time, we were no longer in lockdown. This incident took place in September 2 years ago. I was driving from my parents' home to a friend's apartment near a university campus, a journey of about an hour and a half. We had arranged to spend the weekend together after not seeing each other for several months. Although the event wasn't connected to my friend in any way, it struck me how perilous it actually was when I began recounting it to them. I recall, one of them remarked that it must have been the most dreadful 45-minute drive of their life. At the time, I found it amusing, but now I realize just how true that statement was. I left quite late that day, around 9 p.m. I recall the sun had already set, and I was going to arrive late, which I didn't particularly like. However, I was familiar with the route, as I often traveled it. For a bit of context, it was a 90-minute drive, and I usually paused halfway at a McDonald's parking lot to have a cigarette before continuing. Keep this in mind for later. I encountered the hitchhiker shortly after leaving my parents' home. I had been driving for about 10 to 15 minutes when I noticed him standing at the exit of a roundabout. He was a tall, slender man with one of those small shoulder bags worn across his chest. Initially, I assumed he was in his 20s, Probably dropped off by friends on his way back from a party or something, which was a silly thought because it was far too early for a party to end. But that wasn't my first impression. I immediately felt a sense of sympathy and stopped. I rolled down the passenger side window and inquired about his destination. I quickly realized he was significantly older than I had initially thought, at least in his 30s. His face was extremely pale, and the way he looked at me honestly unnerved me. He was heading in the same direction as I was, toward the town where I usually took a break midway. I don't know what I was thinking, to be honest. I just acted on impulse. It was on my route, so he got into the car. Then I experienced the most unsettling 45 minutes of my life. I don't mean to sound melodramatic, but it truly. I realized immediately that I had made an error as I drove away, because as soon as I began to move, he clutched his stomach tightly and rocked back and forth in the passenger seat, repeatedly mentioning that he wasn't feeling well. I offered to roll down the window for some fresh air, but he insisted he just needed to take his medication. To say I felt uneasy would be an understatement. I vividly recall thinking that I had made a terrible decision, and that no matter what transpired, I should not stop under any conditions. The first thing I did was inquire if he would be alright with being dropped off at the McDonald's downtown. He seemed to agree, but regardless, it was irrelevant because I had no intention of stopping anywhere else. I was already on edge. I decided to pretend to concentrate on the road and tried to appear as composed as possible. Throughout this time, he continued to speak. I don't remember the exact sequence of events, but I do recall him asking if he could see my nails, to which I replied that I was driving. He apologized and reassured me that I shouldn't be concerned because he had never assaulted anyone. He mentioned that his girlfriend was upset with him and wanted to break up if he didn't return. He inquired about where I was headed, what my plans were for the evening, and if I intended to take a long, hot shower. He persistently asked if I had a boyfriend and how we liked to spend time together. I stated that it was private and that I didn't want to discuss it. He nodded and said he was once like me before he got arrested. Twice, he insisted that we were being followed by other cars. He then asked if I smoked. I firmly declined his offer of a cigarette, expressing that it was a nice gesture but unnecessary. Despite this, he left a cigarette on the dashboard. At one point, he retrieved his phone and attempted to show me a photograph of himself alongside an image of his mother, remarking on her beauty. I cast a brief glance at it, noticing that the screen was damaged. It displayed multiple straight black lines of broken pixels, with a reddish hue on the left side and a yellowish tint on the right, which made the picture appear quite unsettling. He became upset because my glance was so brief and raised his voice, accusing me of not caring about what he was saying. I firmly replied that I was listening but couldn't keep looking because I was driving. He immediately calmed down, apologized, and expressed a desire to show me another picture. He inquired if the vehicle was mine. I responded that it belonged to my parents, as I didn't want him to think I was wealthy or financially well off. I was simply a young student without any money and preferred to be left alone. To deter further conversation, I lied, claiming I had hit a deer the previous week and needed to concentrate to avoid damaging my parents' car. I hoped he would eventually fall silent. Instead, he stared directly at me and softly muttered, "Poor thing," before correcting. G himself in a fluster, pointing to a road sign and exclaiming, "I meant the road sign, poor road sign." Frankly, at that moment, I considered that if he ever attempted anything threatening, I would crash the car into a tree with both of us inside. It was a shameful thought, but I didn't want him to escape unscathed. He screamed "TH." His name was Archangel Michael. He inquired about my name, and I provided a false one. He persistently asked if I recalled his name and, abruptly, he crouched down in a panic, pacing back and forth while insisting that I should know it. I simply responded with, "Okay," because, truthfully, that was all I could manage to say. Eventually, when we arrived in the city where he had to stop, he requested a ride to the train station. It was nearing 10 p.m., and I was aware that there were no trains running, no lights, and certainly no cars or signs of human activity. I suggested we stop at the McDonald's, to which he nodded and agreed, saying, "Yes, yes." He mentioned that I was kind and placed a coin on the dashboard next to the cigarette. I halted in the parking lot, not bothering to park properly, but rather stopping right in the middle, where I felt most exposed. He simply exited with a, "See you later," and I drove away quickly. I never saw or heard from him again. This incident occurred during my university days, while returning from a trip with my friend. I suspect I misread the map, leading us to take some sort of shortcut that resulted in us getting lost on the mountain roads. My friend was at the wheel, and I was supposed to be navigating. It was the sole task I had. Although it was around 8 p.m., the darkness had already enveloped us due to the shadow of the mountains. I spotted a white truck ahead and suggested to my friend that if we followed it, we would likely find our way back to a main road quickly. I thought it was a fairly reliable plan, considering I had no idea where we were, much less which mountain we were traversing. We followed the truck for a considerable distance, gradually realizing we were drifting farther away from the main highway and delving deeper into the desolate mountain roads. As pavement gave way to dirt and the path narrowed to a single lane, the truck, better suited for such terrain, accelerated and vanished from view. It struck us as strange and rather improbable for the vehicle to disappear so abruptly. There was nothing ahead of us except for dark and grimy mountain roads. This unsettling thought lingered in my mind, but our top priority was to find our way back to a main road. I was flipping through a map, holding a flashlight in my mouth, as there was no cell phone service available. We continued along the road when I noticed some lights emerging behind our car. Glancing in the side mirror, I saw a white truck trailing us. It was the same truck we had been following. I informed my friend of what I had just seen, and we both kept our eyes on the truck using the mirrors. The situation was becoming increasingly unsettling. The truck then switched off its headlights. Was it even feasible to navigate these winding mountain roads without lights? The whole scenario was becoming extremely unnerving. I was anxious, and I could sense that my friend was even more on edge than I was. I finally voiced the obvious. I think that truck from before is behind us. It's following us. The moment the words left my mouth, I began to curse. My friend shifted uneasily in his seat and accelerated to verify my suspicion. The truck behind us matched our speed, still with its lights out. We were at a loss for what to do and started arguing about it, the tension mounting rapidly. Then, abruptly, the truck behind us seemed to felt an overwhelming sense of relief wash over us. It seemed utterly futile. Whoever was driving that truck clearly had an intimate knowledge of these roads. I regretted our decision to follow the mysterious driver as we continued along the narrow, one-lane path. Constantly on the lookout for an opportunity to turn around. We exchanged sarcastic comments with each other about how we might extricate ourselves from this predicament. Then, as if materializing out of thin air, the truck suddenly veered into our lane once more and screeched to a halt. My friend, quick to react, managed to stop just in time, leaving us trailing behind the ominous white vehicle again. He muttered that if we didn't take action, things would end disastrously. I had never felt such intense stress before. A moment or two later, we reached a stretch where the road widened, and my friend seized the opportunity. We executed a U-turn, although the limited space caused his car to graze the guardrail as we made our escape. We noticed sections of the road where the truck could have disappeared and reappeared in front of us, which explained the how, but we were still left puzzling over the why. Why was this person tormenting us? We knew we were on the path back to civilization, so my friend pressed the accelerator while I anxiously glanced over my shoulder, fearing the truck might re-emerge at any second. I repeatedly urged him to increase his speed, though I was aware he was already doing his best, and the truck could appear out of nowhere once more. We continued along the dirt roads until, finally, they transitioned into paved ones. The sight of the lights from nearby homes brought a sense of hope, and soon enough, we stumbled upon an independent gas station. My friend immediately turned in, and we, skidding to a halt, my friend dashed inside and urgently grabbed the clerk by the arm, hurriedly explaining our predicament. He implored the man to call the police and asked for directions to escape these mountain roads. The clerk appeared uninterested in our desperate request for assistance, so we persuaded him to step outside. My friend then insisted, "Believe us, someone is pursuing us. If a white truck with all its lights off shows up any second now, will you believe us then?" Just as he finished speaking, the truck arrived, its lights still off, screeching to a stop a few meters from the gas station. It then slowly turned around and disappeared back into the darkness. We couldn't catch a glimpse of the driver, but we did notice something peculiar, a logo and some writing on the side of the truck. The clerk at the gas station remarked, "Oh, now I get it. You're talking about the group from the church. Perhaps, cult, is a more fitting term." I pressed him for further details, and it turned out that the entire mountain was their domain. They owned a village where the leaders and followers all resided together. I grasped the concept of cults, but I couldn't fathom why the truck was tailing us. I inquired about their motive for following us, and according to the elderly gentleman at the gas station, there are frequent attempts by followers to escape after having second thoughts. Thus, the cult is extremely vigilant about any vehicles approaching their village. Their reckless driving and relentless pursuit of anyone nearing the village is said to be the cause. Vehicle, curiosity piqued by the unusual sight. Over the years, there have been numerous accidents in these mountains. I recall that a cult was prominently covered in the news and media some years back, though it seems to have vanished from public attention since then. I suspect the man who trailed us was acting as a lookout, either for escapees or for families attempting to retrieve their loved ones. The whole experience was unnervingly eerie. My name is Alex, a 20-year-old graphic designer residing in Denver. I've always been captivated by the tranquil solitude of late-night drives. There's an indescribable peace in the stillness of the nocturnal world that aids in clearing my mind and offers an escape from the relentless daily grind. However, a few weeks ago, what was supposed to be an ordinary drive morphed into a terrifying ordeal that lingers in my thoughts to this day. It was a Saturday night in early June, and I had been laboring over an extensive project at work, clocking long hours. I was utterly drained and desperately needed a respite from the perpetual gaze at my computer screen. So, around midnight, I opted to embark on a drive along Route 54, a highway winding through the countryside just beyond the outskirts of Denver. I've traversed this route countless times, and although it's quite secluded, it has always felt secure and familiar to me. As I departed, the city lights of Denver slowly faded away, leaving only the road ahead illuminated by my headlights. The radio played softly in the background, offering some soothing melodies, and I experienced the usual calm that accompanies driving through the serene night. Roughly an hour into the journey, I observed something peculiar. A car was stationed on the roadside, its hazard lights flashing intermittently. I decelerated my car, intrigued by this unexpected sight. Curiosity piqued my interest as I noticed a battered sedan parked by the roadside. It appeared as though it had been abandoned there for quite some time. There wasn't a soul in sight, yet it was peculiar to find a vehicle in such a dilapidated state in this remote region. Should I pull over and check if someone needed assistance? I pondered. I've always had a tendency to lend a hand to others, but the solitude of this stretch of highway gave me pause. I kept driving, convincing myself that it was likely nothing significant. Nevertheless, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As I continued, my thoughts drifted to how late it had become and the considerable distance from any sign of civilization. The darkness seemed denser, and the silence felt increasingly oppressive. The only sounds were the steady hum of my engine and the occasional whisper of leaves rustling in the wind. I frequently glanced at my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the sedan trailing me, but it was just an empty road stretching behind. A few miles further, I spotted headlights approaching from behind. Relief washed over me as I realized another vehicle was near. I hoped they might have some insight into the situation with the broken-down sedan. As the approaching car drew nearer, I observed that it was an old pickup truck. It sped past me swiftly, but there was something about it that unsettled me. The driver didn't even glance in my direction, which was odd given that we were the only vehicles on this lonely road. I attempted to dismiss the growing unease and concentrate on my driving. However, as I rounded a bend, an overwhelming sense of dread engulfed me. The road ahead was obstructed by a large, makeshift barrier constructed from wooden planks and OL. Worn but friendly, echoing slightly in the eerie stillness of the night. Flat tires left me with no way around the obstacle, and it appeared the barricade had been deliberately positioned to obstruct the path. What on earth? I muttered, feeling my heart race. I halted the vehicle and shifted it into park, contemplating my next move. With no signal on my phone, reaching out for assistance was not an option. I was entirely isolated. After turning off the engine, I exited the car to examine the blockade more closely. It was haphazardly assembled, suggesting it hadn't been there long. Anxiety surged through me as I pondered how to dismantle it. Just as I was about to start pushing the wooden planks aside, a noise emanated from the forest. A low, dragging sound reminiscent of footsteps shuffling through the dense undergrowth. I held my breath, scanning the shadowy trees, but the obscurity made it difficult to discern anything clearly. I fought to remain calm, yet the sound was growing louder and drawing nearer. Suddenly, the pickup truck I had noticed earlier reappeared, moving at a sluggish pace, as if it were circling back. Instinctively, I considered jumping back into my car and locking the doors. But I realized I needed to address the barrier if I wanted to escape. I stood immobilized, torn between the fear of the unknown and the practical necessity of clearing the road. The truck came to a stop behind my car, and I watched as the driver got out. He was a man in his mid-40s, sporting a grizzled beard and a weathered face. He regarded me with a curious expression before turning his attention to the barricade. A blend of relief and suspicion washed over me. "Need some help?" he called out, his voice tired but amiable, resonating in the unsettling silence of the night. Gruff yet not unfriendly, I paused before replying, "Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to move it." The man approached and began assisting me with the barrier. We worked in silence, my nerves clearly on edge. I glanced at the truck and noticed a toolbox in the back. An unsettling feeling lingered, suggesting something was amiss with the entire situation. As we shifted the last of the planks, the man started speaking. "This area's been experiencing some trouble lately," he mentioned, "strange things happening." "What kind of strange things?" I inquired, attempting to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. "Just rumors. People say there are gangs around here causing trouble, taking things that aren't theirs, breaking into places where they don't belong. It's enough to keep folks on edge." A shiver ran down my spine. I saw a car back there with its hazard lights on. "Do you know anything about that?" I asked. The man's face tensed, and he looked away. "Nope, haven't seen it." We finished clearing the road, and he offered to follow me until I reached a main route. I was thankful yet still uneasy. As we drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see either the sedan or the man's truck tailing me. Eventually, we arrived at a more populated area with streetlights and a gas station. I thanked the man and continued on my way. I didn't look back, not wanting to see if he was still following me. When I finally reached home, I was both exhausted and shaken. The entire experience felt surreal, like a scene from a horror movie. I couldn't stop pondering the broken. In the days following the unsettling encounter with the sedan and the mysterious barrier, along with the man in the pickup truck, I found myself trying to decipher the events of that night. I inquired with locals, but nobody seemed to have any knowledge of unusual happenings on Route 54. I contemplated informing the authorities but hesitated, unsure of precisely what to report. Reflecting on it, I'm still uncertain about what I encountered that evening. The only plausible explanation I could muster was that some form of trouble had occurred in the area, prompting the man in the truck to establish the barrier to regulate traffic along the road. The recollection of that drive continues to send chills down my spine. I've since learned to be more vigilant and to heed my instincts. Late-night drives once served as my preferred method to relax, but now they remind me of how swiftly things can go awry. I'm Jamie, a 32-year-old freelance photographer based in Portland. I've always cherished the tranquility of late-night drives. There's something soothing about being alone on the road, leaving the bustling city life behind with the open space stretching ahead. However, a few nights ago, what I anticipated would be a peaceful drive turned into a harrowing experience I can't seem to shake off. It was a Friday night, around midnight, when I opted to take a drive out of town along a rural route I often use to unwind. This road is renowned for its solitude and natural beauty, making it an ideal choice for relaxation. The drive commenced smoothly. City lights faded into the distance, and my headlights pierced the darkness. The road is narrow and winding, bordered by dense trees that loom on either side. The solitude had always felt serene to me, yet tonight there was something distinctly different about it. I couldn't quite pinpoint what it was, but the night seemed to weigh more heavily. About halfway through my journey, my car began to sputter. Initially, I assumed it was a minor glitch, but then the engine lost all power, and the vehicle coasted to a halt. I attempted to restart it, but nothing worked. With no phone signal, summoning roadside assistance was not an option. The situation started to feel increasingly desperate. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my flashlight, locked the car, and began to walk. My objective was to reach the nearest town, which I knew lay several miles ahead. The woods flanking the road felt as though they were closing in on me, with only my flashlight as my companion. I trudged forward, trying to ignore the growing sense of isolation with each step. After a couple of hours, I spotted a distant light. It was faint yet visible, and it reignited my hope. I quickened my pace, my fatigue momentarily forgotten. As I drew nearer, I realized the light emanated from an old farmhouse. Relief washed over me, though it was tinged with apprehension. The place appeared abandoned and dilapidated, but I had no other choices. With my heart racing, I knocked on the door. After a few moments, it creaked open, revealing a man in his 60s with a grizzled beard and a weary expression. His sharp eyes seemed to scrutinize me intently. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice gravelly. I explained that my car had broken down and that I had walked for hours seeking assistance. The man introduced himself as Earl, and he seemed to take pity on me, agreeing to assist by offering to drive me back to my car with his tow truck. As we traveled back to where my vehicle was parked, I attempted to engage in small talk to alleviate the tension. Earl was courteous yet aloof, his gaze frequently darting to the road behind us. A sense of unease began to creep in. Why was he so on edge? Upon reaching my car, he efficiently began the task of hooking it up to the tow truck. Exhaustion made me feel exposed as I observed him, noting how his actions were just a bit too smooth, almost robotic. My discomfort intensified, and as he was nearing completion, he abruptly paused and turned to face me. "You know," he remarked, "it's not safe out here at night. Many people have run into trouble. You're fortunate I happened to come by." I forced a nervous chuckle, replying, "I appreciate it. I'm just glad I stumbled upon you." Earl's eyes narrowed. "You're very lucky. There are things out here you don't want to encounter." I was about to inquire about his meaning when the distant growl of an engine reached my ears. Earl's demeanor shifted abruptly. He appeared suddenly vigilant, almost anxious. "We need to get out of here," he said sharply. Before I could react, Earl pushed me towards the tow truck and leapt into the driver's seat. I barely had time to comprehend what was happening before the truck jerked forward, towing my car behind it. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice quivering. He didn't answer right away, instead keeping his focus on the road and a firm grip on the steering wheel. "We've got to get to town. There's no time for explanations." The drive was fraught with tension and silent. Every so often, I would glance in the rearview mirror and spot the truck in the distance, pulling up precisely where we had just been. A growing sense of dread crept over me. Who were those people, and why was Earl so determined to steer clear of them? As we neared the edge of town, Earl finally broke the silence. "They're the reason I stay away from others, why I keep to myself. They're dangerous." I was perplexed. "What do you mean? Who are those people?" Earl simply shook his head. "It's better if you don't know. Just stay away from this area, it's not safe for someone like you." He dropped me off at a gas station on the outskirts of town, and I thanked him, though my gratitude was overshadowed by confusion and fear. Earl wasted no time waiting for my response. He drove off quickly, leaving me with a lingering sense of foreboding that refused to dissipate. Eventually, I got my car towed to a nearby mechanic and made my way home. Exhausted and shaken, the events of the night replayed incessantly in my mind. I've tried to make sense of what happened, but the fear I felt remains vivid. I don't know what Earl was concealing or who those people were, but I'm convinced that night was more than just a series of unfortunate events. I've learned to be more cautious on my nighttime drives and to avoid that area altogether. That stretch of road is no longer my sanctuary. So, thank you, Earl, for your help that night, but I wish you had been more open. And to anyone driving out there, be cautious. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some roads are best avoided, especially when the darkness conceals more than you might expect. To set the stage, let me say that I adore driving. I relish the idea of setting off on long drives with no particular destination, just me, my music, and the road stretching out before me. Living in Nebraska, I often find myself taking back roads and solitary highways that weave through the countryside, leading to small towns and eventually bigger cities. I typically embark on these trips at night when there's less traffic to contend with. I've been doing this since I got my license 5 years ago, and until recently, I never encountered any problems or ran into trouble. That all changed a few nights ago. For context, I'm a relatively petite 22-year-old woman, and as I mentioned earlier, I usually take these trips entirely on my own. They serve as a great way to clear my mind when I'm stressed, upset, or overwhelmed, or to help me piece together a plan to resolve personal issues. I also used to embark on these long, solitary drives to escape the toxicity of my home life when I lived with my parents, using it as a coping mechanism for their alcoholism. However, now that I have moved out and am in a much better mental space, I don't feel the same urge to jump in my car and drive aimlessly anymore. On the night this incident occurred, I was grappling with a mix of overwhelming stress, anxiety, and a myriad of personal issues I'd rather not delve into. I felt restless and irritable, especially around my boyfriend, unable to concentrate on anything else. I decided that a drive might help clear my head. My boyfriend was understanding and told me to take my time. I reminded myself to be cautious and not to stay out too long since it was growing quite late. I agreed, gave him a goodbye kiss, and set off. I drove around our city for about 30 minutes, but the anxiety over everything happening in my personal life lingered. So, I decided to head further north along those familiar, dark, winding Milan highways. I maintained a steady speed of 65 miles per hour, taking the curves more gently just in case a deer might suddenly appear around a bend. As I continued driving, I admired the vast, empty darkness of the snow-covered fields and barren trees. It was honestly a bit eerie being completely alone with no other cars in sight, seemingly in the middle of nowhere. The few houses set miles back from the road appeared lifeless, and the dead cornfields were withering away, gradually being buried under the snow. It felt like something straight out of a horror movie, and I half expected to glimpse a ghost in my rearview mirror or see someone emerge from the clusters of trees dotting the horizon. The only illumination came from my headlights, and even then, I strained to see through the dense darkness of the night. By now, it was just after 11 o'clock, and I resolved that once I reached the familiar roundabout, which offered a route either to a small town or back towards the city, I would head back home. That roundabout was still about 15 to 25 minutes away, but aside from my imagination conjuring up the worst scenarios, I wasn't particularly worried. After I was alone, with no other drivers to concern myself with, right? Wrong. As I was driving, rounding another bend, I spotted a vehicle with its hazard lights flashing roughly a quarter of a mile ahead. It appeared to be a dark-colored sedan, partially positioned on the shoulder, with the rest jutting into the road. It seemed as though the driver had pulled over hastily but hadn't fully managed to clear the lane. The driver's side door was wide open, and as I eased my vehicle towards the opposite side of the road to pass by, I noticed what seemed to be blood on the inside of the door. There was no one in sight, neither on the road nor in the car, and I was the sole motorist in the area. In this remote part of the country, cell phone reception is generally poor. More often than not, no matter how much you wished for it, you couldn't get a signal. This was precisely the case when I glanced at my phone, hoping for service. A woman alone on the road at night, approaching an abandoned vehicle that appeared to have signs of an attack inside, without any cell reception. I'm no fool. I've watched numerous episodes of Investigation Discovery, Criminal Minds, and have read far too many true crime books to recognize that this situation screamed danger. However, a small part of me was concerned that something dreadful had happened to whoever was in that car, and I felt compelled to offer assistance. These roads receive very little traffic at night, and the temperatures were well below freezing. If someone was injured or in trouble, there was no one else around to help. Despite my hesitation to get involved, I erred on the side of caution and continued driving my car, albeit at a slower pace. As I drew closer to the vehicle, I slightly rolled down the passenger window, turned off the music, and called out, "Hey, is anyone there? Are you alright?" There was no immediate response, which left me worried that someone might be unconscious nearby. I wasn't inclined to leave my car to investigate, so I decided to call out one more time. If there was still no reply, I resolved to drive away and report the situation as soon as I had cell reception. However, if I did receive a response, I would determine my next steps based on that. Once more, I shouted, "Hey, what happened? Are you okay?" There was a prolonged silence before I heard a rustling noise emanating from the shadowy trees, followed by a gruff voice answering me. Initially relieved, I was about to respond or even stop my car and step out when I noticed three things almost simultaneously. As I edged past the sedan, I observed that there was no damage to the hood or any part of the vehicle, which struck me as odd given the bloodstains on the inside of the door. In my rearview mirror, I caught sight of someone emerging from behind the sedan, moving quickly toward my car. The individual wasn't bleeding or showing any signs of injury and was donned in a mask, Not a typical face mask or a ski mask, but one akin to those seen in the Purge movies. They held something in their hand. I couldn't quite discern what it was, as I didn't get a clear view, but judging by its length and shape, I suspected it might have been a tire iron or a crowbar or something similar. Without a moment's hesitation, I pressed down on the gas pedal the instant I caught sight of those objects, driving as if I were fleeing straight from the depths of hell. My heart pounded fiercely in my chest, and my entire body trembled. In my rush, my window was still down, and the music remained off, allowing me to distinctly hear someone, definitely a man, shouting at me, though I couldn't make out what he was saying. I only knew I needed to leave that place at once. I cast one last glance in my rearview mirror as I sped away, mainly to check if they were getting into their sedan to pursue me or if they had stopped. The man with the weapon continued to stand in the middle of the road, watching me. Just before I averted my gaze from the mirror, I noticed a second man emerging from the trees where there had been some earlier commotion. He was also wearing one of those eerie masks, and there was no sign of blood on him. I likely violated every speed limit that night, but my sole focus was to distance myself from those men as quickly as possible. As soon as I reached the roundabout, I turned toward town and parked in the Walmart parking lot, which fortunately still had a few cars, presumably belonging to workers closing up for the night. There, I had a full-blown meltdown. Once I managed to regain my composure, I called my friend Troy, who happens to be a police officer, to explain what had transpired. He expressed concern for my well-being and, after asking if I was safe and where I was, he began to take action. He instructed me to follow him, explaining that since the incident occurred outside the city limits, his ability to assist was limited. However, he could reach out to the local police or sheriff within their jurisdiction to take my statement and investigate. I agreed, expressed my gratitude, and while awaiting the arrival of the authorities, I called my boyfriend. Through my hysterical sobs, I managed to convey what had happened just moments before. Naturally, he was extremely worried about my safety and urged me to either return home immediately or allow him to come and get me. I informed him that the police were on their way to take my statement, so I couldn't leave, but reassured him that I was fine. I stayed on the phone with him until I saw the familiar sight of police cruisers pulling into the parking lot. I provided the officers with my statement, and they assured me they would return to the scene to investigate and attempt to apprehend the perpetrators. However, without surveillance cameras or a description of the men, I doubted their chances. In my panic, I hadn't even thought to note the license plate number, a detail that only occurred to me when the police inquired about it. All they had to go on was a dark-colored sedan and two masked individuals. After giving my statement, I went home and spent the entire night curled up next to my boyfriend, listening intently to every creak the house made, fearing the men might return at any moment to finish whatever they had started. Since the incident, I haven't received any updates from the police regarding any potential leads. I'm uncertain if they ever will, but I'm just grateful to still be here and that I didn't stop my car or get out. I'm not sure what might have happened to me if I had. I still have countless questions that remain unanswered. What were they doing? Was that really blood on the interior of the car, or merely a ploy to draw more attention? If it was actual blood, did they harm someone else? What would have become of me if I had stopped? Needless to say, I won't be embarking on any more late-night drives, and I fervently hope never to encounter those bizarre individuals again. It all began with an ordinary day at work. I was employed at a small grocery store back then, and my responsibilities involved collecting shopping carts from the parking lot and bagging groceries, the usual minimum wage tasks. The morning was rainy, and predictably, I was assigned to handle the carts. About 2 hours into my shift, I noticed a man hurriedly loading his groceries into his car. I rushed over to assist him with his bags, asking, "Mind if I help you get out of the rain?" "Yes, thank you so much," he replied. As he closed his trunk, he gave me a very surprised look, scanned me from head to toe, and smirked. "Are you a new hire?" "No, I've been here for a couple of months," I responded. "Oh, you are very pretty," he remarked in an oddly suggestive tone. "Thank you, have a good day," I said, dismissing his comment, as I was not interested. As I walked back to the store to avoid him until he left, I could feel his gaze following me. Nonetheless, I continued with my work, not dwelling on it as I resumed my duties after my break. During my lunch break, I was at the register, busily bagging groceries, when I noticed the same man from earlier entering the store. I feigned ignorance of his presence and continued with my task. He approached the register and picked up a single chocolate bar. I didn't offer him a bag. Looming over me, he inquired if I was going to bag his item. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you wanted a bag for just one thing," I replied, placing his chocolate bar in a bag and wishing him a pleasant day. He then asked, "Where do you work, sweetheart?" Feeling uneasy, I replied that I wasn't comfortable sharing that information. He nonchalantly responded, "That's fine. You've been here, what, 5 hours? You probably finish around 7, right?" With a smile, he walked away. Feeling unsettled, I reported the incident to my manager. She advised me not to work outside anymore and suggested I have someone accompany me to my car. By the end of my shift, a male coworker walked me to my truck. We scanned the parking lot for the man's car but didn't spot it. Once my coworker returned inside, I started my truck and called my mom to recount what had happened. As soon as she answered, I left the parking lot. Just as I turned onto the road, I noticed his car following mine. I informed my mom that I suspected he was trailing me, and she advised me to drive around to try and lose him. For about 20 minutes, I circled around town. At a red light, he pulled up next to me and started shouting something through his open window. I pretended he wasn't there, but I could still hear him. He was saying that I would bear wonderful children for him and that I would make an excellent slave, addressing me as "little lady." He then began to speak in very explicit terms about what he intended to do if he managed to catch me. I told my mom that I was going to dial 911 and instructed her to contact the police if I wasn't home within an hour. While I was attempting to reach the authorities, the man accelerated past my truck, repeatedly slamming on his brakes to provoke me. Panicked, I waited for the nearest intersection and quickly turned up the block. During the turn, my phone slipped beneath my seat, so I opted to head to the nearest open establishment to seek refuge and have someone else call for help. The closest open place I could find was a convenience store at a gas station. I pulled into the parking lot, got out of the car, and dashed inside the store for dear life. I urgently explained the situation to the store clerk, who then led me to the break room and locked me inside. As I was processing the possibility that I might have escaped this nightmare, I suddenly heard the store's front doors being violently shaken. Before I realized what was happening, the clerk joined me in the break room, locking the door behind her. She was on the phone with the police, who were already on their way. We remained silent, huddled together in the dark room. I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt for involving another woman in such a terrifying situation. My mind was racing with questions. Did I inadvertently encourage him? All I said was, "Have a good day." Had he been following me for more than just tonight? How did he know my car? Would the police arrive in time? Were we going to make it out alive? Finally, the small room was flooded with the flashing red and blue lights of the arriving police vehicles. Blue light seeped from the crack beneath the door as a voice on the intercom assured us it was safe to emerge. Despite trembling, the clerk retrieved her keys and unlocked the door, allowing us to step out and give our statements. Once the police departed, I turned to my unexpected savior, expressing my gratitude with heartfelt thanks. We cried, embraced, and she accompanied me to my car. The following evening, I returned with a meal and an Amazon gift card as tokens of appreciation. I've experienced a near-fatal car accident, and stood just 10 feet from a mountain lion in the wild, yet I can honestly say I believed that moment was the end of my journey. Thank you for reading, stay vigilant, be cautious, and remain safe. This encounter occurred a little over a decade ago, when I was approximately 26 years old, around 2012. During that period, I often went out with friends to bars and parties, staying out late most weekends. My usual hangout was a friend's house on a side street near a bustling main road lined with popular bars and restaurants. Parking was on the street, and when weekends were busy, it was common to find a spot several blocks away. The area closer to the bars was quite pleasant, but venturing a few blocks in the opposite direction, it became somewhat sketchy at night. After a night out, I had to walk back to my car, parked several blocks away in the slightly sketchier area. During the winter, I often wore a thick sweater or pullover paired with a beanie. This detail is only significant because, from a distance in the dark, it was hard to discern my appearance beyond my general height and build. As I moved away from the bars, the traffic thinned out, and the roads became shrouded in darkness due to the absence of streetlights. While I strolled down the sidewalk, a car began to inch along the street. matching my pace as it drew alongside me before coming to a halt. The car window rolled down, revealing a charming young woman behind the wheel. She remarked that I looked cold and offered to give me a lift to my destination. Her demeanor was very amiable. I mentioned that my car wasn't far and thanked her for the offer, but I intended to continue walking. She then made a concerted effort to persuade me to get in the car with her, citing the cold weather. There was no attempt at small talk to learn anything about me or to ensure I wasn't a creep. She simply insisted I join her in the car, quite assertively. Given what I was wearing in the darkness, I doubted she could have had a clear idea of my appearance to genuinely find me attractive. Even if she did, I don't know many women who would pick up a male stranger after midnight while alone in their car. With about 10 bars nearby, she could have gone to any of them if she was simply looking to meet someone. I couldn't fathom a reason for her insistence. Driving around and offering to pick up strangers was not something I expected to encounter. Yet, there she was, persistently driving alongside me, repeatedly proposing I accept a ride. I politely declined her offer and continued on my way, quickening my pace. Eventually, she drove off, and once she was a few blocks away, I hastened to my car, ensuring no one was lurking nearby. The entire situation struck me as odd and incomprehensible. Later, when I recounted the incident to my friends, all the women unanimously agreed they would never offer a lift to a random man, especially at night, regardless of whether he resembled Ryan Gosling or Channing Tatum. I suspected someone might have been lying hidden in the backseat, armed and ready to rob anyone who accepted the ride. I couldn't fathom any legitimate reason for her to offer rides to complete strangers in the dead of night. It seemed far too risky for her to pick up random people. My assumption was that something sinister was afoot in that vehicle, and I often wonder what might have transpired had anyone climbed into the car with her. When I was 18, I had an experience while house-sitting with a girl I was studying with. The family we were house-sitting for attended the same church as she did, but I didn't know them well personally. My role was mainly to keep her company in the sprawling house. This was back in 1997, a time when teenagers like me typically didn't own cell phones. During that week, there was a brief break in the school calendar, which explained the family's absence and the deserted streets. The rearview mirror that the car's headlights seemed intent on following my every move. The neighborhood, usually bustling with the chatter of students, had taken on an unusual stillness, both around my apartment and the house I was looking after. Both were conveniently located near the university, with my apartment only a brief 3-minute walk away and the house just an additional 5-minute drive. However, the usual liveliness had diminished, leaving an eerie calm. During my stay at the house, an unsettling event occurred. I had a vivid dream of navigating a shadowy forest, driving along a steep, unpaved road with only the illumination from my car's headlights piercing the darkness. Suddenly, as I descended a hill, the headlights flickered and went out, plunging everything into blackness. The car gradually slowed to a halt and ceased to function. When I awoke the next morning, I discovered that my car, which had been in perfect working order the day before, refused to start. I ended up having to call a mechanic, who informed me that the issue was with the starter motor. That was the first unnerving incident of the week. A day later, on Friday, I decided to visit my parents, who resided in a smaller town about a 45-minute drive away. I packed my belongings at the house and planned to stop by my apartment to gather anything else I might need for the weekend. As I mentioned, the journey between the house and my apartment was only about 5 minutes. Given that it was winter, darkness had already settled in by the time I left at around 7 p.m. While driving from the house, I noticed through my rearview mirror that the car behind me was following closely, mirroring every turn I made. At that moment, I was wary but not alarmed, just attentive enough to keep an eye on those persistent headlights. A peculiar sensation crept over me as I realized something unusual was happening behind me. However, as I approached a traffic light, the unsettling presence vanished. My relief was short-lived, for the car had reappeared, now cruising alongside me. I glanced to my right and saw a man sitting alone, grinning at me with an unsettling, almost deranged expression. For a fleeting moment, I thought to myself, perhaps I should drive while wearing a hat or something similar to conceal my identity as a petite 5 feet 2 inches woman with long, flowing blonde hair cascading to my waist. Nevertheless, I reassured myself by noting that he was in the lane designated for right turns, so I should be safe. I proceeded onward, only to find the headlights glaring at me from behind once more. What a jerk, I muttered, questioning who would drive in such a manner. Fortunately, my turn was coming up on the left, and after enduring another minute or two of this relentless pursuit, I slowed down deliberately, avoided using my indicator, and swiftly turned left into my driveway. The automatic gate opened, and I hurried inside, watching as it closed securely behind me. I exhaled a sigh of relief, believing the ordeal had concluded. As I gathered a few belongings from the car to carry with me, I noticed, while heading toward the stairwell, a man standing at the gate that had just closed behind me. He was still on the opposite side, and I was at the far end of the parking lot, but I recognized him as the same individual from the tailgating car. He was jumping up and down, shaking the gate in a fit of rage. Despite this, I felt relatively secure, being on my side of the gate, and the presence of a nearby group of noisy students arriving for a party or some such gathering further eased my anxiety. I made my way to the stairs and began ascending from the ground level. As I ascended to the first floor, rounding the stairs, I noticed someone sprinting across the parking lot toward the staircase. In hindsight, I still can't grasp why I didn't immediately comprehend what had happened. I suppose it was because I subconsciously understood that there was a group being ushered through the pedestrian gate. As I was navigating the staircase, between the second and third floors, someone unexpectedly touched me. I spun around to find a man who had blended in with the small crowd. He said something, and I retorted with a sassy remark, telling him to back off. I then turned away from him to continue up the stairs. Upon reaching the third floor, he grabbed me from behind, pressing my back against his chest with his left arm wrapped around my neck. I felt something pressed against my right side, a knife. He guided me down, and I recalled thinking about the broken light on the bottom level, realizing this couldn't end well. Despite the gravity of the situation, I remained calm. I offered slight resistance, prompting him to tighten his grip, making it difficult for me to breathe. As I began to feel faint, becoming a dead weight, he started to lower me. I managed to elbow him, making contact. He released me but quickly spun around to face me. In the struggle, he tore the front of my button-down top. Suddenly, he paused, looking at someone behind me, someone taller than him. His eyes widened in surprise, and he turned to flee. I screamed, then turned around to see who had come to my aid, but there was no one there. However, people emerged from their apartments afterward, and the police were called. It was the second time they had been summoned that night. It turned out that another peculiar incident that occurred involved my father contacting the police, who had arrived about an hour earlier. My mother had sensed something was amiss all evening and had incessantly worried my dad, convinced that something dreadful was about to happen to me. As it turned out, she was right. They apprehended him, and I later identified him in a lineup. He was a repeat offender in the vicinity, accused of assaulting approximately 14 women. One victim had even thrown herself from the first floor of her apartment to escape him, resulting in a broken leg. Weeks later, before his trial, the police informed me that his cell door had been mysteriously left open, and he had vanished, seemingly aided by an inside job. I've experienced my share of unsettling incidents, but this one still makes me contemplate how rapidly things might have taken a turn for the worse. I am a 20-year-old woman, and this story dates back to when I resided in southern Indiana, in an extremely isolated area. It was a weekend night, and my best friend and I were on our way home after her late night shift at a local waffle restaurant. She decided to pick up her dog from her house so we could spend the night at my place, which becomes significant later on. We began our journey into the rural countryside where I lived, and to reach my home, we had to navigate a long, narrow dirt road. About a mile in, we noticed the headlights of a truck. As we drew nearer, we realized it was a well-maintained vehicle, possibly from around 2018. I admit I don't know much about cars, so please forgive my lack of expertise. The truck was parked sideways, obstructing the entire path, leaving us bewildered. I stepped out of the car and inquired whether the driver was all right. Initially, he seemed optimistic upon seeing me and mentioned, "I'm just waiting for a friend to pick me up. My truck is stuck." He flashed a smile, but I couldn't help noticing that his pupils were almost entirely dilated. He glanced back at my vehicle, observed that I wasn't alone, and saw a dog sticking its head out of the window. His grin vanished quickly, and he commented, "Pit bulls are mean and nasty." With that, he turned away and returned to his truck. I went back to my friend and instructed, "Put this in reverse and use whatever driving skills you have to get us out of here." We reversed my old, '95 Cadillac, which really wasn't suited for dirt roads, and managed to make our way back to the main road with a sense of relief. We decided to take an alternate route home, but to our astonishment, the same man was parked on that road, standing off to the side, smiling and staring into our headlights. We were on the brink of panic and pressed the gas pedal all the way home. I have no idea how he managed to arrive there before us or what his intentions were, but I'm grateful I wasn't alone, being a rather naive college girl at the time. Even though the presence of the pit bull likely saved us from that man, the dog unexpectedly snapped at my friend a few months later, causing her severe injuries. It had been a good dog its entire life, and I know she was a responsible owner, so I suppose it's just an instinctual thing with pit bulls. They can snap at any moment. My name is Christine, and I was 23 years old when this unforgettable experience occurred. New Year's Eve unfolded with an unforgettable story as I ventured out with my cherished dog, Max. It was just a few hours shy of midnight, and I decided to take him for a brief walk before preparing for the evening's celebration. Typically, Max was well-mannered and accustomed to roaming without a leash, so I opted to let him wander freely for a moment to savor the brisk air as we ambled through our neighborhood. The evening brimmed with anticipation as locals busily prepared for the impending New Year festivities. The streets were adorned with vibrant decorations, and a palpable sense of excitement filled the atmosphere. As Max and I strolled along the sidewalk, he delighted in investigating his surroundings, immersed in the sense of the night. The evening was still young, with no hint of chaos yet on the horizon. Little did I know, everything was about to change within the span of a minute. At that moment, the first firework erupted in the sky, illuminating the darkness with dazzling colors and a thunderous boom. Instinctively, I reached for Max, pulling him close, but it was already too late. The sudden noise startled him, and in a heartbeat, he slipped from my grasp and dashed down the street. I called his name desperately, but my cries were drowned out by the barrage of fireworks. I watched in despair as he vanished into the night, panic-stricken. My heart pounded as I realized the urgent need to find him amidst the chaotic celebrations. I spent hours driving around the neighborhood, searching tirelessly for my dog. The fireworks continued to light up the sky, and the overwhelming noise made it difficult to concentrate amid the dazzling lights and commotion. Explosions echoed around me, but I was determined to find him. If I was distracted by the fireworks, I knew he must be going through a nightmare. As I turned each corner and drove through every street, I called out his name, desperate to bring him back home and shield him from the fireworks. The celebration surrounded me, but my sole focus was finding my beloved furry companion. I informed my friends and family that I wouldn't be attending any festivities because I was searching for my dog. A few of them offered to help in the search, though I doubted he'd follow anyone but me if they found him. Finally, as I turned onto a dimly lit street, I noticed a group of people gathered around a public bus, as if something unusual was happening. My heart filled with hope as I parked the car and hurried toward the crowd. I could tell from their conversations and gestures that they were reacting to an animal on the bus. I pushed my way to the door and climbed aboard. There he was, huddled in the corner, barking frantically at every firework that soared through the sky. I spoke to him softly, and he immediately recognized my voice. The fireworks continued to explode, but I didn't care. I reached down, scooped him up, and cradled him in my arms. He nestled against my chest, seeking comfort from the terrifying night. I expressed my gratitude to everyone who had tried to help and rushed back to my car. Once inside, with Max held securely, the drive home was a bit quieter, as the sound of fireworks gradually faded. Max had been found, and now the new year could truly begin, with both of you safe and sound. I sat in the car with Max, watching the fireworks through the window. The brilliant lights that once terrified him now seemed to sparkle in celebration of our reunion. It was a New Year's Eve we would never forget, a night that had sent me on a wild, late-night drive in search of my best friend. Earlier that year, I had borrowed my dad's Tesla to pay a visit to my aunt, who resided in the countryside. As a 24-year-old who loved driving, especially my dad's car, I was thrilled he had allowed me to take it. The road trip led me through some fairly remote areas, but it was a smooth journey overall. On the way, I passed through a small town that had a charging station for the car. While I was there recharging the Tesla, I attracted quite a bit of attention. Evidently, not many electric vehicles passed through the area, and the townspeople had plenty of questions for me. I continued the rest of the way without any issues and stayed with my aunt for a few days before deciding to head back home on a sunny afternoon. I embarked on my return journey around 3 p.m. The first segment of the drive took me through a bustling town, followed by some quiet suburban neighborhoods. Retracing my steps, I soon found myself once again on the long, narrow highway that seemed to stretch and twist endlessly. It was tranquil, but as the hours went by, I started feeling increasingly fatigued. To keep myself alert, I turned up the radio quite loud, hoping it would help me stay awake. I squinted at the road, trying to concentrate, and that's when I noticed a faint glimmer of light in the distance. It was the glint of my car's headlights reflecting off another vehicle parked along the roadside. As I drew nearer, it became clear that the car was abandoned. The darkness, coupled with its tinted windows, made it appear even more mysterious. The area was incredibly isolated, and the idea of being stuck there was unnerving. The closest town was an hour's drive back. I pressed on with my journey but remained vigilant, just in case someone was nearby. A few minutes later, a blindingly bright light appeared in my rearview mirror, its intense glare making it impossible to discern the car itself. Only its dazzling lights. They seemed to be closing in, so I reduced my speed, assuming they would soon overtake me. But as I continued down the road, I encountered something disturbing ahead. Another car positioned directly in the middle of the road, completely blocking my way. The car's lights were off, and I didn't notice it until I was nearly upon it. I slammed on the brakes the moment I realized what was happening. The lights in the rearview mirror continued to grow brighter, and I could hear the sound of a vehicle approaching from behind. I decided to turn my car around to escape the situation, but when I glanced back, I saw another car parked diagonally behind me, effectively cutting off any escape route. Suddenly, everything clicked in my mind. I heard the doors of the surrounding cars opening and closing. Panic surged through my veins. Without thinking, I veered off the road and into the trees, trying to bypass the obstructions and reach the other side of the road beyond the traffic. I was so focused on dodging trees and preventing my car from getting stuck that I didn't even check to see if anyone was pursuing me. About 10 seconds after veering off the road, a gunshot reverberated through the air. Glancing back, I saw them in pursuit, the bullet striking somewhere in front of my vehicle. Fear and adrenaline surged through me as I continued navigating the winding dirt path. Another shot echoed, this time hitting the back of my car. I drove like a madman, accelerating to full speed through the dense forest, desperately trying to evade them. My Tesla impressively managed the nearly off-road escapade I subjected it to. Eventually, I realized I had lost them, but I didn't ease off the accelerator until I reached the highway once more. It took about 10 minutes of driving before I regained enough cell signal to contact the police. The assailants never caught up, and as far as I know, they were never captured. To this day, I can't shake the curiosity about how they orchestrated such an elaborate ambush. Had they noticed me arriving in an expensive car and quickly concocted a plan? Was it the guys I had chatted with while charging my car? I had mentioned to them that I would be passing through again in a few days. The uncertainty still troubles me, but as you might expect, I'm no longer allowed to drive my dad's Tesla. My name is Danny, and I was 19 when this incident occurred. I lived with my parents and aspired to move out, so I purchased a car with my saved money and eventually secured a job. I often saw advertisements for R breeds all over. It seemed like an easy way to earn money with flexible hours. All I had to do was pay for fuel. Several of my friends had told me how beneficial it was, so I decided to go through the sign-up process and give it a try. However, the reality turned out to be quite different. Navigating tight schedules made the job pretty stressful, and the payments were often just a few dollars. If I didn't grab the orders with high tips or payouts, I would barely earn enough to cover the fuel costs. Being a teenager, I only needed to manage my car payments and insurance, so I wasn't aiming to earn a fortune, but it still felt like I was being shortchanged considering the time and effort involved. I pushed the thought of finding another job to the back of my mind because I was a bit lazy. But everything changed after one particular incident. I accepted an order from KFC and headed out to deliver it to the customer's location. It was a sizable order, enough for maybe 4 or 5 people, but the payment for this delivery was much higher than usual, and the tip was $20, which was unheard of. The app tells you the payment amount when you accept an order. As I was en route to the destination, I received a message through the app from the customer asking about my whereabouts. The app indicated a delivery time of about 30 minutes, and I was on track to arrive in approximately 15. They could see my live location on the app, so I didn't understand why they were asking. I didn't see the need to pull over and reply, so I continued driving, as I would be there in about 5 minutes. Within mere seconds, another message arrived, impatiently questioning why it was taking so long. I had picked up the order just a few moments prior, and this was clearly visible on the app, so it wasn't as though I was behind schedule. I dismissed the peculiar messages, assuming they were either a mistake on their part, a result of intoxication, or simply typical behavior from a demanding customer. I knew the area fairly well, but I had never really ventured into this particular part of town. It was situated in what one might refer to as the rough part of the city, a neighborhood marked by gang violence and minimal police presence. Most people avoided coming here, but I had driven through a few times and understood it wasn't excessively perilous. The address led me to an apartment building, and as I neared the location, I noticed a lot of people staring at me. I parked my car and checked my phone again, only to find another message, laced with harsh words, urging me to hurry. I usually kept my phone on the stand to easily view delivery instructions, but knowing it wasn't wise to leave it exposed, I decided to take it with me. The instructions directed me to enter the building and deliver the order directly to the customer's apartment, which was somewhat unusual, but I assumed they simply didn't want to come down. I pressed the button for the apartment number and was buzzed in. As I ascended the stairwell, an unsettling feeling crept over me, something felt off. People were loitering throughout the building, and I even had to step over a passed-out woman on the stairs. As on the verge of simply dropping the bag and fleeing. As I approached the apartment door, a voice from within beckoned me to enter. I hesitated momentarily, puzzled as to why they couldn't just come to retrieve it themselves. However, I was on the clock and eager to complete the delivery. I stepped inside the apartment, and as the door closed behind me, the gravity of my blunder hit me. All the lights were off, with the only illumination in the room emanating from the enormous television mounted on the wall. Scanning the room, I noticed a couple of unsavory-looking individuals. I offered them the bag, and they regarded me with disdain. The man who appeared to be the leader motioned for another person to take it from me. He began circling me as I stood there, utterly paralyzed. I had no clue what I was doing or how I had ended up in such a perilous situation. Without hesitation, he started interrogating me about what I had. I told him it was just the food and that I needed to leave. He chuckled and ordered me to sit. At that moment, I was completely myself, unsure and vulnerable. He began questioning why I had taken so long and what I could do to make amends. I suggested refunding the tip, which sent him into a frenzy. "Tip? What tip? I didn't give you any tip," he exclaimed. Foolishly, I retrieved my phone to show him the $20 tip he had supposedly left. He snatched it from my hand, declaring he was taking the refund. The rest of them erupted in laughter, thoroughly humiliating me in front of these people. I was utterly powerless. I meekly requested the return of my phone, but I wasn't exactly an imposing figure. I was genuinely struggling to stay alive, so when he declined, I resigned myself to my fate. He settled down and began rummaging through the bag, selecting the food he desired. Glancing at me, he demanded to know why I was still there, leaping up and brandishing a knife as he spoke. I quickly apologized and hurried toward the door, dashing down the stairs. I nearly stumbled over the unconscious woman on my way out. Once in the car, I drove faster than I ever had before, heading to a safe place. As soon as I arrived, I broke down into tears, my entire body trembling as I hyperventilated. I was a complete wreck. What on earth had I been thinking, walking up and entering someone's apartment, especially a place like that? I had been explicitly warned never to go inside anywhere, but all I could focus on was the promise of a generous tip. When I got home, I recounted the incident to my parents. They were incredibly supportive and relieved that I was unharmed, but they were also livid that I had ignored their warnings about venturing into dangerous places. We managed to lock the phone remotely, so you likely couldn't do much with it, but I knew I would never see it again. Weeks later, after acquiring a new phone, I discovered that Uber had suspended my account because he claimed the order wasn't delivered. From their perspective, I had vanished with the delivery and never returned, resulting in him getting a full refund, free food, and my phone. Losing both my phone and my job was a tough blow, but I was thankful that I escaped without injury. I had no desire to continue working as a delivery driver. After leaving the delivery job, I secured a position at a restaurant instead. A few years ago, when I first got my bike, being a young female rider often drew unintended attention. People couldn't help but notice me as I cruised through the streets. It was exhilarating, and I cherished the feeling of the wind and the freedom the open road offered. Most of the bikers I encountered were incredibly kind and welcoming, and there was a strong sense of community among us. However, there were moments when the attention became uncomfortable. One evening, as I was heading home after a long day, the sun was setting, casting a warm glow across the sky. The road was peaceful, just the way I preferred it. My bike roared beneath me. And for a brief moment, everything felt perfect. But then, as I pulled into a gas station to fill up my tank, I noticed him, a young guy on another bike, likely in his 20s. He parked next to me, and our eyes met. I offered a polite nod, assuming he would move on. Instead, he removed his helmet and began a conversation. He had a friendly smile and an easygoing demeanor. Although his self-assurance was commendable, there was something about his persistence that made me uneasy. We chatted for a few minutes about our bikes and the thrill of riding. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that he was being a bit too forward. I nodded and kept my responses brief, hoping he would eventually tire of the conversation and ride off into the sunset. However, that wasn't part of his plan. After we finished refueling our tanks, he got back on his bike and revved his engine, indicating that he intended to follow me. Anxiety began to creep in as I realized this stranger intended to ride alongside me. While not entirely unheard of, I had occasionally ridden alongside other bikers until we went our separate ways. I was on my way home and didn't want to be followed. As the miles passed, he persistently stayed by my side, occasionally attempting to impress me with a wheelie or a sudden burst of speed. It wasn't overly unsettling, just persistent. I decided it was time to shake him off. Knowing my bike and its capabilities well, I hit the throttle, accelerating away from him. The wind whipped past me as I pushed my bike to its limits, and when I glanced back, I saw him in the distance, desperately trying to catch up. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I weaved through the winding roads, but the relentless rider wasn't giving up. He was closing in fast. The roar of his engine grew louder, and I knew I had to make a decision. He caught up with me again, and it became clear that I wasn't going to lose him. I decided to pull over, and he stopped next to me, visibly proud of himself. He removed his helmet, revealing a massive grin, as if we had been engaged in some kind of fun game. I informed him that I was heading home and that I'd see him around. He continued to smile at me, assuring me that he'd ensure I got back safely. I wasn't in the mood for this. I snapped a bit and told him directly that I was fine and didn't need an escort. Just as I started to leave, I gave him a wave, one last attempt to make it clear that I was saying goodbye. "Leave me alone." He set his helmet down, which meant it took him a while to prepare. During that time, I managed to put a significant distance between us. Glancing back, I saw him far behind, desperately trying to catch up. Adrenaline surged through my veins as I navigated the twisting roads, but the determined rider refused to give up. He was closing in quickly, and I could hear the roar of his engine growing louder. I knew I had to make a decision. As the road took a sharp bend, I had to reduce my speed to maneuver safely. That was when he seized his opportunity to overtake me. He revved his engine and surged forward, but he misjudged the curve. Before I realized it, he crashed into the wall with a thunderous bang. My heart pounded in my chest as I watched in horror. He flew over the barrier, vanishing into the darkness. Without hesitation, I screeched to a stop and rushed to the edge. I pulled out my flashlight and shone it into the water, desperately trying to locate him. It was nearly pitch black, and I could barely discern how far he had gone. All I knew was that I had seen him fly straight ahead, evidently landing in a river. But the river was wide, and visibility was minimal. I shouted for him while fumbling with my phone to call for help. The river was moving rapidly, and he could have been miles downstream by the time assistance arrived. I stayed there for hours that night, searching for this stranger, fervently hoping we would find him. An overwhelming sense of guilt enveloped me. One moment, I was racing away from him. The next, I longed for nothing more than to see him alive. Even now, I grapple with the notion that I was to blame. I didn't even allow him the opportunity to clarify why he was heading in the same direction as I was. His body was never recovered, and that river has claimed numerous lives over the years, making me feel as if I had a hand in it. I had been conversing with a girl online for several weeks, and she appeared to be the perfect match for me. So, when she proposed that we meet at her place, which was situated in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't resist the thrill of the adventure. My GPS navigated me through a maze of back roads, promising that I was approaching her location. However, as I turned yet another corner, I found myself in the heart of an apparently deserted junkyard. Rusty old cars and dilapidated buildings loomed in the darkness, illuminated only by my headlights and the moonlight. My confusion quickly turned into fear when I realized I was in the wrong place. Panic surged through me when a harsh glare of headlights suddenly appeared behind me. A group of burly men, their faces shrouded in shadows, blocked my path and surrounded my truck. One man, evidently the leader, approached my window with eyes full of suspicion. "What the hell are you doing here, boy? This is private property," he demanded. My words spilled out in a hurried explanation of my situation, that I was supposed to meet someone nearby but my GPS had misled me. They exchanged glances, their suspicion morphing into a sinister grin. Sure, the leader said, "but you see, we've been having some trouble with trespassers lately. Can't be too careful, you know." The companions chuckled ominously, their laughter echoing in the tense silence. Without uttering another word, I quickly shifted my car into reverse and backed out of the area as swiftly as I could manage. My heart was racing, beating wildly in my chest. I executed a rapid turn, faster than I believed possible, and fumbled with the GPS, desperate to instruct it to guide me home. The men continued to shout at me as I sped away, but my troubles were far from over. My GPS, struggling to keep pace with my hasty escape, soon directed me onto an even narrower road. Darkness closed in around me as I ventured deeper into the woods. Anxiety made my legs tremble uncontrollably, and my hands struggled to follow simple commands. With no cell service and not a single sign of civilization, I was utterly lost. Suddenly, as if mocking my plight, a deer darted out from the shadows and onto the road. Panic surged through me as I slammed on the brakes, screeching almost to a complete halt. The deer barely reacted, continuing to amble leisurely down the road. Suddenly, I realized that the rednecks from the junkyard had caught up. Their truck was now alarmingly close behind me. They leaned on the horn, hurling obscenities, and I truly began to fear that I wouldn't escape this situation alive. Desperation drove me to follow the deer, inching forward and praying the creature would move aside. Yet, it persisted in commanding the road ahead of me for an excruciatingly long time. As it continued to run in front of me, the longer it lingered, the more it began to resemble some kind of demon. It looked like something straight out of Norse mythology, its horns appearing eerily otherworldly. Arms feeling like they were reaching into the sky, my heart pounded as I observed the creature's every movement. The relentless rednecks inched closer, their voices growing louder and more furious. The tension was unbearable. Trapped behind the deer with nowhere to escape and a group of hostile men closing in on me, the narrow road seemed to stretch endlessly. With every passing moment, I couldn't help but imagine all the different ways I might meet my end. The men in the truck behind me began to nudge the back of my car, their engine roar rang as they eagerly tried to force me off the road. Panic set in as I honked at the deer, even considering the futile idea of abandoning my car and running into the night. I knew they would catch me within moments. As we continued down that dreadful road, the deer suddenly bounded to the side, vanishing into the dense underbrush. Seizing the chance, I accelerated. When I glanced back in my mirror, I saw the deer leap out again, directly in front of their truck. They slammed on their brakes, frantically shouting for it to move. I was certain they had no qualms about killing a deer, but hitting it at such a slow speed would likely only anger it, and the damage to their vehicle wouldn't be worth it. Without a second's hesitation, I sped down the rest of the road, hitting every bump with no regard for the state of my car. I drove on for what seemed like hours. My heart continued to race until I finally stumbled upon a quaint little town. There, I regained my sense of direction and eventually made it to the nearest motel. Only after locking the door behind me did I feel secure enough to breathe deeply. As I lay in bed, attempting to process the day's events, I couldn't help but ponder about that deer. Was it merely a coincidence, a bizarre twist of fate, or did it somehow sense my fear and deliberately lead me away from danger, preventing them from pursuing me? I had nearly forgotten about my date until I checked the app to explain what had occurred, only to find she had unmatched me. My thoughts were conflicted about the entire situation. Was she a catfish all along, luring me into peril? Did she assume I had ghosted her, leading her to unmatch out of embarrassment? I kind of suspect she might have set me up, either as a prank or as part of the junkyard group. Whatever their plan was, I'm still uncertain, but I've decided to give up on dating apps entirely. On a bitterly cold winter night, I found myself in a situation that would send chills down any parent's spine. My 2 young children sat shivering in the back seat of our car as I struggled to maintain my composure. We were stranded on a snow-blanketed road in the middle of nowhere, far from the nearest town. The car's engine had sputtered and released its final breath some time ago, and my phone had no signal. Desperation hung in the frigid air as I tried to reassure my children that help was on the way. I had called a tow truck, but it felt like hours had passed since then, and the relentless icy darkness enveloped me, and just as despair threatened to overtake me, a glimmer of hope appeared in the form of headlights emerging in the distance, steadily growing brighter. Relief cascaded over me as a man arrived in a pickup truck, his breath visible in the frigid night air. "Looks like you folks could use some help," he called out, his tone friendly, yet something about the scenario put me on edge. Despite my apprehensions, the thought of my children enduring the cold compelled me to accept his offer. "Yes, thank you," I replied, attempting to conceal my anxiety. "We've already called a tow truck, but it's taking a while." The man didn't hesitate. He promptly opened the hood of my car and began to fiddle with the engine. His hands moved deftly, perhaps too swiftly, and an uneasy feeling lingered as the minutes dragged on, stretching into what felt like an eternity. Turning his attention to my children, he remarked, "You know, it's pretty darn cold out here," and cast a warm smile in their direction. "Why don't you let them sit in my truck? It's nice and warm inside." I hesitated, glancing at my children, who were practically blue from the cold, their teeth chattering uncontrollably. "No, thank you. We're okay," I stammered, trying to summon some courage. But the man persisted, insisting it was the best option for them. "It won't be long, just until I get this fixed up," he assured, his smile unwavering. "I've got hot chocolate in the truck. They'll love it." The children began to whine, their small voices filled with misery, and I felt a knot formed in my throat, but I agreed, albeit reluctantly, for a short while. My heart thudded in my chest as I watched my son and daughter climb into the stranger's truck. I observed them anxiously from a distance, as minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity, while the man continued to work on my car. I couldn't shake the ominous feeling that something was seriously amiss, and my mind raced with grim scenarios. The children, wrapped in the stranger's blankets, seemed blissfully unaware of the unsettling atmosphere surrounding us. They laughed and chatted about how snug and warm the truck was. My daughter even remarked how wonderful it would be to spend the night in a cozy bed instead of our cold car. The stranger, who had been tinkering with my car's engine, suddenly looked up and said, "You know, the nearest town is only about a half-hour drive from here. I'd be more than happy to take your kids there, give them a warm meal, and a place to sleep for the night. It's not safe for them to stay out here." My heart raced as my children's faces lit up with excitement. They began pleading with me to let them go, their voices filled with innocence and trust. "Mom, please, it'll be fun," my son exclaimed. Despite the biting cold that still clung to me, a different kind of chill ran down my spine. I absolutely despised everything about this situation. I needed to protect my children, but allowing them to leave with a stranger was obviously not an option, nor was risking freezing to death. They weren't making the situation any easier. I hated how naive they were. I despised how they would disregard my attempts to communicate the seriousness of our predicament with a stern look. The insistence of the stranger, combined with my children's increasing enthusiasm, created a distressing quandary. I summoned all the courtesy I could muster and responded, "Thank you so much for your offer, but the tow truck should arrive shortly, and we'll be on our way. We wouldn't want to inconvenience you any further." The man's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed slightly as he looked at me with a trace of frustration. "Ma'am, I'm just trying to help. It's not safe for your kids out here in the cold. I assure you, I'm a good guy." The standoff persisted, my heart thundering in my chest as the tension grew heavier. The stranger's persistence clashed with my maternal instincts, and I felt an increasing urgency to shield my children from any potential threat concealed behind this seemingly benevolent gesture. As the minutes ticked by, the kids continued to shiver, despite the warmth inside the stranger's truck. I could no longer ignore their discomfort. Striving to sound as calm as possible, I told them, "It's time to get back into our car. The tow truck should be here soon." The children reluctantly agreed, and we climbed out of the stranger's truck, expressing our gratitude for his assistance as we headed back to our vehicle. The man's eyes tracked our movement. He appeared disappointed but did not press any further. I quickly bundled the kids back into the car and locked the doors. As we settled in, the distant sound of a tow truck's engine reached our ears. The sound of the engine reached our ears as the tow truck arrived, its lights piercing the darkness like a beacon of hope. The driver, a burly man with a kind expression, jumped out and began working on my car. As he attended to it, he glanced at me and the stranger, remarking, "You're fortunate I got here as quickly as I did." His tone was grave. "This road isn't safe at night, it's best to stay in your vehicle." The stranger's demeanor shifted instantly, his friendly smile disappearing and replaced by a look of steely determination. Without uttering a word, he climbed into his truck and drove off into the snowy night, leaving me with an unsettling sense of foreboding. With my children safely beside me, in our car, on the path to recovery, the dread that had enveloped me earlier began to diminish. The late-night drive home, though still brisk, felt significantly less menacing than the eerie encounter we had just endured.